What is up, everybody? What's up, everybody? Jesus Christ. What's up, everybody? We're here for YouTube. Be sure to share the stream wherever. This is pretty much our first stream we've done on YouTube in years without Jackson's support. Because, yeah, we did it late night, and the community voted they wanted it on YouTube, so we're going to have it on YouTube. Now, I'm going to try to make this stream more organized. I'm going to try to make it more informative. I'm going to try to make it better suited for the platform. So I'll just get to that, right? And I want to basically, you might be confused by the title, and you might be confused about what the goal here is. Marxism, morality, and third worldism, what the hell? What's the connection? Well, I actually want to explore a lot of things that I couldn't last night or the previous stream that were pertaining to what I think is a common theme, actually, which is the issue of, let's just call a spade, Marxism and morality. I think that this issue cuts across all controversies that I've been involved in the past few weeks, right? So there's a few things that I've gotten in trouble for that I'm dedicating this stream to address, more or less, right? And by the way, everybody hit the like to boost the stream however much you can. This is the first stream we're doing on YouTube that is just us as a community. We don't have Jackson's help right now. So go ahead and share the stream everywhere you go. But in any case, there's a few things I got in trouble for over the past week that I want to actually address, and every single one is going to be addressed in the stream. So the first thing I got in trouble for, right? Or the first thing we're in trouble for, rather. Nick Fuentes, he went live yesterday, and he was almost certainly talking. You guys need to understand, we have insider information. We know how their little fucking army works and shit like that, right? He is seething. He is raging. He is soy raging about the ACP, like, daily. And he has his smaller lieutenants, who you'd think are small and insignificant, but they're directly in communication with him. And he gives them the order to constantly, like, try to launch bombs at us or whatever. Because, let's just be honest, coming after us was the biggest mistake of this stupid kid's life, right? I told you his generational run ends with me. I wasn't bluffing when I said that. That was not a bluff, right? But in any case, on his stream yesterday, and I don't know if I could show the footage on YouTube, he dedicated a huge portion of that to soy raging and crying and screaming about how communists and third worldists and Muslims, who is he talking about? He's talking about Haz al-Din. He's talking about General and Commander Haz al-Din, okay? Make no mistake of it. He's saying that we are manipulating the right wing and that it's a grand conspiracy, and that because the right is turning on him, he's blaming that on us. He's saying it's a conspiracy by the ACP, just like he blamed us for Charlie Kirk's shooting. But he's specifically coming at it from an angle that we're coming from a place of anti-white third worldism. That the reason we are opposed to U.S. interventionism in Venezuela and around the world, and the reason we do respect the right of national self-determination of nations, not just because it materially is important for the struggle of the American people to make their country free, but because it reflects our principles, so there's a moral dimension for sure. He's saying that this is just anti-white third worldism. This is an unrealistic moralism which wants to sacrifice the material interests of America as a nation on the altar of, promoting third world countries. He's claiming that we want to, sacrifice America for Burkina Faso and for Venezuela, and that we should actually put our interests first. We should be our own, number one fan, be on our own team, and whatever. Like, this is the angle he's basically coming from. And he's trying to tell his audience, which is increasingly radicalized in the opposite direction that he wants them to be, which is in the left-wing direction. Let's call a spade a spade. The left wing is dog-walking the right now. And that's happening on a national level with the current administration. Trump is just at a record low approval rating right now. And we're seeing the left wing is crossing cultural divides like it's never before. Okay, on the one hand, you absolutely have the libtards in Portland or whatever, the cringy Ukraine libtards. You absolutely still have those people. But precisely the element within MAGA that was the subject of MAGA communism have kind of grown into this, what else can you call it but regime opposition. They just oppose the U.S. regime. Whether it's from a conspiracy angle, whether it's from another angle, they are against the U.S. regime. Straight up. They don't trust the U.S. regime. And these people watch Candace Owens, they watch Tucker Carlson, and, you know, a lot of the times, this is, and I've confirmed this. I've talked to Eddie. I've talked to so many white people, you know, for lack of a better term. And this is actually uniting. This is the number one force that is repairing the conflicts within American families right now. People often don't realize that much of the cultural and political conflicts are happening within the same family. So you've got a younger daughter. Well, obviously the daughter's younger than her parents, right? But you've got a daughter, you've got millennial or Zoomer kids, and then you've got boomer parents, or you've got Gen X parents, or whatever. And it's like, there's been this fault line and this kind of civil war within families, like a Thanksgiving dinner. But families are starting to come together, which they are naturally biased to do, around a kind of shared, like, hey, you know, we may not agree on everything, but we don't trust this regime. No, we don't trust this regime. This is a dirty, rotten regime. This is an Epstein regime. You know, you could have the blue hair Wiccan daughter and the conspira boomer father, and this is like straight up reuniting families, like on a level we've never seen before in this country, right? So it's like, this is the truth, okay? The subject of MAGA communism, in a huge, I mean, Trump's at a record low approval rating. He won the election in 2024. Now he's at a record low. I think he's at a 30% approval rating. The American public are not happy with what he's doing. They're not happy with the excesses of ICE, especially against U.S. citizens. They're not happy with this unconstitutional nonsense. They weren't happy with the bombing of Iran. They're not happy with the intervention and forever wars and the neocon BS. And most Americans are just not having it. Now, Nick Fuentes is claiming that this is all a conspiracy by the left. Well, certainly this is benefiting the left. And I think that's a good thing. Now, what we're going to be here to do going forward is we're going to make sure that this momentum isn't hijacked by the Democratic Party. Because the left is winning the lion's share of the zeitgeist right now. The right is getting dog walked. They've never been more unpopular. But it's on us, and we have an incumbent responsibility to make sure that the momentum isn't going to be stolen by the right. Well, technically, yeah. The Democrats are right-wing. So we have a responsibility to make sure that the Democrats aren't able to hijack the momentum. So, yeah, and you know, there's... everything I'm going to cover is all going to be part of the same thread. So I even see there's already a guy soying out and crying about Rockhill. Oh, the Lord Saint Rockhill is about to get criticized while I defend Zizek. Before even hearing my argument, this guy's already crying and shitting his pants over it. So I cannot wait to actually destroy your idol Rockhill and basically explain in very lucid, very clear terms why, if you're actually a Marxist-Leninist and you take it seriously, you have to actually take Zizek on some level more seriously than Rockhill, would allow you to, right? So in any case, yeah, we're gonna cover that. That's another topic, because I'm gonna get to it across the list. Remember, these are all the things I've been getting in trouble for over the week. So the first thing is the so-called nonsense about third worldism. Right? This is Nick Fuentes' way of coping with the fact that the right wing is getting dog walked on a national level, and the left wing is on the rise. Now, again, left wing is on the rise, but we have a responsibility to make sure the Democrats don't hijack that, which they already are, of course. But there's a new type of radicalization going on, which we need to turn into a communist consciousness. And, you know, I'm absolutely happy that people are turning on the Trump regime. You know, a lot of people, I haven't been on YouTube a lot, so a lot of people are curious. They're like, well, what do you... Hey, look, I support whatever makes people skeptical of the U.S. regime. MAGA communism was a strategy we developed under Biden, where the regime line was supporting the Nazis in Ukraine. And who were the dissidents that were actually pushing back on that? They were, by and large, coming from the MAGA movement. Now that Trump is president and he's in power and he represents the regime and he hasn't broken with the regime in any kind of way, as we predicted he wouldn't, in the circumstance and in the condition that the working class doesn't, have any leverage in the MAGA movement, which they were unable to develop. We tried, we tried our best. But at the end of the day, when we were being attacked by gatekeepers on the left and the right, all we could have done is done our best to create some kind of working class independent thing within that movement. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, and Silicon Valley came and took over everything. So now it's run by Palantir, it's run by J.D. Vance and Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and Sam Altman and Bill Gates or whatever. And as a matter of fact, just kind of as a side, fun fact, Trump is actually thinking about replacing the current Fed chair with the I think former or current CEO of BlackRock. If you don't understand the significance of that, BlackRock is the crossing of Silicon Valley and Wall Street. So BlackRock is very Silicon Valley coded. So we're looking at the Silicon Valley ruling class kind of taking over. The torch is being passed down from the old Wall Street elites to the Silicon Valley ones, right? And this is a generational shift. The Silicon Valley guys are usually Gen X, and the Wall Street guys are usually related to them by blood, by the way, but they're usually from an older generation. To some extent, there is a divide. For example, George Soros. George Soros isn't happy about this generational shift going on within the bourgeoisie. So that's why Soros likes to stir up and cause so much trouble for the tech giants. And that's why Democrats are against the tech giants, because it's kind of interesting. Republicans have become the party ruled by Gen X and some boomers, but the main boomer ruling class is still with the Democrats, right? Anyway, I don't want to get into these analysis and get bogged down in it. Because I'm still going down the list of all the things I've gotten in trouble for. So another thing I got in trouble for was something that an idiot in my comment, a bunch of idiots in the Midwestern Marx comment section and in my chat, really, really upset about my my rejection of Rockhill's kind of simplistic nonsense copium. Rockhill is creating this new cult of people whose entire scholarship consists in analyzing the fart recycling mechanisms of the university, thinking it's somehow profound to point out that bourgeois universities and institutions serve the ruling class rather than, the revolutionary subject. And, if by the way, all these comments I'm getting from these people who call Zizek and French theory a bunch of nonsense, you know what? Even if I did grant you that it was nonsense, and we'll get into that, could you think of an even worse waste of time than dedicating your scholarship to, analyzing academia? What's the utility in that? What are we learning that we didn't already from Antonio Gramsci about just the concept of hegemony? What are we learning about, you see, the university system is biased toward the bourgeoisie. And it's a tool of imperialism. What did you think it was? Did you think did you think it was like an agora? Did you think it was like this ideal place of reason and whatever? I mean, it's an incredible naivety. So how is that a productive thing to be a scholar of just pointing out the fucking obvious? And, know them by their fruits. Where's the scholarship that's actually going to be useful, in a positive sense, for creating a new communist movement in Western countries? Okay, buddy, you're claiming that the reason why, communism hasn't taken off in the West is because the academic elites are anti-communist, which is not a surprise to anyone. But to say that's the cause, it assumes that all we have to do is, that idiot Daniel Tut, who called ACP a criminal organization, by the way. Daniel, whatever his name, Tut, he's the most spineless fucking coward I've ever met, by the way. He's an absolute fucking coward. He's not with the Rockhill stuff. He just goes with the flow, man. He'll see a claim. He won't even double check it. He doesn't even do the bare minimum of fact checking anything. He is such a cattle-like human being. I could not think of a person right now who calls himself a Marxist that I respect less. Anyway, because I'm just saying that because I did do a YouTube episode with him or whatever, right? So, yeah, and there's this idiot in my, hey, buddy, stop soying out in the live chat and just fucking wait. Why don't you actually wait to hear what my argument is, okay? You're a materialist critic of the Western left. Western leftist ideology. How is that useful? No, he's not a materialist critic of ideology. That was Antonio Gramsci. Antonio Gramsci pretty much like laid out everything that there's nothing Rockhill has contributed that is not already there in Antonio Gramsci. Absolutely useless. He's only useful for lazy academics who are like failing to make a living off of their PhD and who therefore like want a cope. They want to cope about it. Where are the meat and potatoes? Where's the substance? Pointing out that Western left academia is compromised is not a groundbreaking insight. I'm pretty sure it's common sense. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that. I will get into it, but I'm just listing off the things I got in trouble for. A lot of people in the Midwestern Marx comment section were extremely upset about my comments regarding Gabriel Rockhill and my defense of Zizek and other forbidden thinkers because I'm such an eclectic. By the way, these people didn't even hear what I said in that video, but I'll actually elaborate further on that. And surprisingly, you'll be surprised, it's fundamentally related to the overarching theme of the stream, which is Marxism and morality. And, I guess the third worldism thing there is to address the Nick Fuentes stuff. Finally, the thing I'm most excited to talk about is the third thing I got in trouble for. And I think a tweet might have gone viral. I don't know. It was kind of growing pretty fast when I saw it. Accusing me of being a cult leader. Why? Because Shattering Hegemony reported that Hazaldin believes in cosmic forces. Donald Farquharson, like the king of Reddit Marxism, I guess, he like made a tweet, Haz believes in astrology, clown face. In the Discord, I was making some funny comments about that. But I'm going to seriously explore these topics. I'm going to seriously explore astrology, which is a term I reject. I think that the correct term is cosmology, right? Or cosmo-materialism. But I'm absolutely going to bite. But somebody said that I was a cult leader, and what they said was that, the reason Haz is saying this is because he's trying to create these new loyalty tests for his followers to embrace his increasingly bizarre and wacky ideas. So what they're basically accusing me of is like saying some insane, crazy bullshit and using it as a loyalty test, like regardless of, whether I believe it, whether I actually have an argument or anything, or they're like, well, he's just making this extraordinarily extreme and crazy claim because he's trying to make people loyal to him unconditionally in a cult-like fashion. And they said I'm a cult leader. And where does all this stem from? Because in the Discord, I just like casually said that on a personal level, I am a little superstitious when it comes to astrology, even the most vulgar kind. It's not too serious. I don't take that too seriously. I don't regard that as theory. I don't like impose that on anyone. I was just sharing, like, am I not allowed to have my own personal opinions? My own personal views? I guess you should just go and like, almost every woman like believes in astrology as well, right? At least my age. So it's like, go and like call them cult leaders too, I guess. But in any case, this dumb guy who keeps talking about this Rockhill ball washer, just get in my Discord and say what you got to say, dude. I'll be happy to like wipe the floor with you. But continuing to talk about how is ideology funded and reproduced? Do you think ideology is funded and reproduced by people like Foucault and scholars of Foucault and fucking esoteric, like underfunded, woefully underfunded fucking humanities departments in Western universities? Do you know how irrelevant those actually are to the reproduction of ideology? Do you even know what ideology is? Like, you're talking about an extremely marginal, irrelevant circle jerk of people who smell their own farts for a living, who basically have no impact on the wider, like, ideology of this country, like, whatsoever. These are not the people who are writing Stranger Things on Netflix. They're not the people who are producing Top Gun in Hollywood. Like, the things that actually reproduce ideology in this country do not come from French and German theory, okay? I'm sorry to break it to you, you fucking idiot. And by the way, most of the retard, like liberal leftists, don't even read books. They call themselves anarchists. They're in Portland. And it's like, did you see that video of the guy, the one like Trump supporter who like knocked out like 10 or 15 liberals or something? I saw, I'll show you the video actually. It's actually remarkable. Those liberals are not reading Slavoj Zizek or some shit, okay? They're watching Rachel Maddow. So, it's such a stupid pretense that this is how ideology is funded and reproduced. No, this is how the ideology you happen to be used to, and you're extremely niche. Like, Rockhill was a student of, or a friend of Rancière. How many people fucking heard of Rancière, okay? This is your own bias. This is your world. This is not the world for the majority of people. Most of the people don't even fucking know anything about French theory. It has actually no effect whatsoever on the prevailing ideology in our society. Like, Jesus Christ. Yo, I-Chan, what's going on, bro? Did Stalin really kill 1 million of his own people? The answer is absolutely not, okay? And this is a problem with scale. When you're talking about the scale of, like, mortality rates, these are things happening at an extremely abstract scale, and blaming that on one person is just extremely silly. Okay, how many car accidents happen per year in the United States? How many people die of preventable diseases in the United States what are we counting is actually murder, by the way? We don't even count the per capita prison population in this country as somehow extraordinary and fucking crazy, even though it's higher than the peak of the per capita population that were in the Gulag system under Stalin. It's higher, actually, and it's the largest in the world. Largest prison population and per capita prison rate in the entire world, right? So people will say Mao and Stalin killed 500 trillion people, because they don't understand statistics and they don't understand how these things are measured, and they don't understand the very basic rudiments of how can you actually ascribe moral significance to populations, to things at a scale that is just fundamentally outside individuals. So you see, we're keeping in theme with the stream, and the stream is going to be about Marxist morality, right? So there were a few Nick Fuentes clips that I wanted to react to. I'm not exactly sure how many I'm going to be allowed to, because, he kind of just uses words that are just banned on YouTube, I guess. I don't know. So let's see what he says. Right here.
That's not moral. They intervened in another...
Okay, so you'll understand the title of this stream when you watch this clip. I'll show you right now.
So if you're coming around with this nonsense about they stole the oil, that's not moral. They intervened in another country. You violated their sovereignty. I don't give a shit. I don't care at all. We do it all the time, and we've done it for centuries. It's called manifest destiny. It's called the Mexican American...
In it, when he was rehearsing this in his head, he thought it would go so hard. He was thinking this is going to go so hard.
American War, the Spanish-American War, the Bay of Pigs. We do it all the time. This is our world, and at the minimum, this is our half. This is our half of the world for us to have uncontested, undisputed dominance, military, commercial, naval, every way, shape, and form. And we will take what we are entitled to. We will take what makes us safer, richer, more prosperous. We will take what we want. Nobody can stop us, and we'll do it again, and I hope we do. And I hope we do it in Greenland, and I hope we do it in Panama, and I hope we do it in Cuba. I hope we do it everywhere where it makes sense for us. You got a problem with that? I don't know. Go back to fucking Pakistan. Go back to some other country and complain about it on the internet. Invented by America. So anyway, I don't know if I want to hear the comments. Botted the dislikes on Telegram.
By the way, he's coping because his own community ratioed him on Telegram, by the way. Fun fact.
Telegram award. Pakistanis botted the dislikes on Telegram. It means nothing. We could kidnap your leader too, if it was necessary.
So what's the most misused words? What are the most misused words in this clip by boy wonder Nick Fuentes? They're we and they're us. Amila, what's up? The alert box is not working on... I used to add it right here. My bad, guys. Just going to add this. There we go. We have it. All good. We got the alert box. Amila, what's up? Appreciate the 5. Appreciate you guys. You want to see more YouTube streams? Appreciate the support. So what's the problem with... what are the most commonly misused words by Nick Fuentes right here? We and us. He thinks that this is an act by the American people, by America as a nation against another nation. So supposedly this is like a team, right? This is like a game where there's other teams and we're the blue team, and it's America for, you know. But even like an idiot right-winger can point out that America is not a united nation, that there is not a balance of interest that reigns supreme in this nation, that guides policy, that things are not done on behalf of what is in the interest of the majority of people here, however you want to interpret that, right?
Based.
Master, what's up?
He's got Netanyahu under the desk.
I think you're conflating those. It would actually be reversed when you think about it. But in any case, absolutely not. First of all, I guess if you have the worldview of a child, this is somehow compelling to you. Info, what's up,
what
bro?
What up, Khan? The party is always right.
Appreciate you, bro. You got that right. You got that right. Anyway, he's fundamentally wrong because the American people just don't benefit from this whatsoever. And I'm not going to get into the moral aspect of it because the entire trick that these people like to use is that you think we should sacrifice our material interests on behalf of moral principles. First of all, I don't actually say that. Your church says that. The Catholic Church says that. That's what the Catholic Church teaches you should do. That's what Jesus taught you should do. That's mainstream Christianity. I am not a Christian, though. I'm a Muslim, so I could...
Who's we?
Amila, what's up?
We like the Nintendo Wii? Crying face emoji.
Yeah, like who is we? Okay. But this is their rhetorical trick. This is like this is the thing Nick Fuentes says to trick his idiot Groyper audiences who are still, loyal to him, I guess, which is that, okay, Haas and the third world communists are trying to say, and all the actual real principled dissident people on the right, I guess, they're trying to say that we should sacrifice our material interests for the sake of some kind of moral principle, right? Well, first of all, this is not in our material interests. And all we have to do is point out countries like China, which serve the common interest of their country just fine.
The deep state waggles its fingers, and the ventriloquist dummy Fuentes speaks.
Absolutely. Alyosha, what's up? So basically, like, this is not in our material interests. And all we have to do is point out countries like China, which don't have to do this. They don't have to violate the sovereignty of other nations. And I mean that sincerely. China doesn't violate the sovereignty of any nation. Even in the disputes in the South China Sea, which is maritime, whatever, rights to maritime use, China has a historically legitimate claim. There's not even a pretense we have any historically legitimate claim to Venezuela. That this was once something that belonged to America but was stolen from us unjustly by foreign aggressors. Yeah, I mean, we don't have any kind of claim like that whatsoever to justify aggression anywhere in South America or Latin America, right? So it's like countries like China do not need to engage in foreign aggression. They don't need to violate the principle of the right to national self-determination whatsoever. And yet they do a better job of serving the common interests of the overwhelming majority of the Chinese people than the United States does. So how exactly is it that in order to survive in this world, in order to prosper materially, we have to get ourselves entangled in foreign aggression and conflicts and wars? Let's put aside the disgust, the natural disgust you should have as a man, to this like fantasy of wanting to humiliate and dominate other men. I guess if you're Diddy, that's somehow compelling to you. Wouldn't surprise me given, Nick Fuentes' community with Ali Alexander and whatnot. But in any case, that is morally disgusting, absolutely. But in addition to that fact, and you'll see how the two are actually related, it's inversely proportional to what's in the best interest materially of the American people. What's in the best interest materially of the American people is developing our own nation and our own country on the basis of what we have already. America is an immensely wealthy country, both naturally, in terms of natural resources, skill, and technical whatever achievement. We don't need to depend. And if you want to make, you can even frame this in a right-wing way as well. What Nick Fuentes is essentially saying is that he wants America to depend on third world countries. It's just, he's absolutely inconsistent with any of the principles he claims to have. He claims to be a Christian. Well, that's out the door. We see that very clearly. But even somebody who claims they want to put America first and disregard the rest of the world, that's not what this is, though. If you wanted to put America first and disregard the rest of the world, you would focus on developing America. You'd focus on benefiting America. And rather than endangering Americans by putting a target on our backs and entangling us in foreign conflicts, if you actually need resources from other countries, you would just do what China does, which is make trade deals and economic agreements. It's called win-win cooperation. Not everything's a zero-sum game. But no, there's somehow some deeper esoteric wisdom that I'm missing here about how the world is inherently cruel, it's inherently evil, it's inherently depraved, and there is a radical asymmetry between moral principle and what we call the cosmos. That is what he's saying here. There's a radical asymmetry between morality and the material order of the world, the cosmos. That's his argument. It's actually like what it is when it boils down to. He's not saying it explicitly, but that's where he's coming from. He's saying that there can be no connection whatsoever between our moral principles and the material world. And that the only place our moral principles find satisfaction and fulfillment is in an otherworldly dimension that has nothing to do with this world, and that this world is actually evil and depraved, and we should acquiesce to the evil. We should bow to Satan in this world and just accept this, right? And otherwise, you're a naive libtard, or otherwise, you're a third worldist. Otherwise, you're just a sucker, basically. That's basically what he's saying. I mean, that's why this argument would be compelling to anyone, right? This notion that depraved, which is inherently twisted, which is inherently bad. Now, this perspective, I don't want to get too philosophical, but it's extremely immature, and it comes from people who feel scorned and resent the world that they live in deeply. And they feel like they're achieving parity with the world by adopting this position. It's like if you were bullied in school, like he probably was, I guess, you were getting swirlies all the time and getting stuffed into Oh my God. Where did it cut off? Where did it cut off? Where did it cut off? How the fuck is YouTube running ad breaks? Where did it cut off? Okay, the swirlies thing. Jesus Christ. You guys need to calm the fuck down. Spamming the effing shit, all right? Just calm the fuck down, Jesus Christ. Last word I said was radically. Okay, well, if you are somebody who resents the material world because you feel wronged by it, you were getting bullied and you just couldn't and yeah, let's face it, expressing and whining about morality doesn't get you anywhere in this world, right? So their way, this is basically the right-wing consciousness, their way of achieving parity with the world is just by, this kind of black pill which says, well, the world is inherently evil, so I have to be evil and I should be evil, right? But it's basically just a cry for love and attention. It's just a cry for love. It's just a cry of someone who wants to be loved, I guess. It's really sad and it's really pathetic, and actually wants to be disproven, and is basically challenging the world to disprove them. And when you think about it, what they were doing is they were crying for the world to disprove them. They were insisting that the world was inherently depraved and evil, and they were doing a lot of sick, hideous, depraved, and evil things. And the entire time they were expecting that the world would disprove them by being nice to them and hugging them. So that's why when the Soviet Union fucking dog-walked the Nazis and brutalized the shit out of them in retaliation, justly, by the way, Nazi ideologists, if you read their memoirs, they were genuinely, morally offended by it. They were like, wait a second, how could you do that? Suddenly morality came back. It's kind of the same thing in revolutions, right? The ruling class has Nick Fuentes' mentality all the time. The French aristocracy did. The Russian aristocracy did. They'll just stick their nose up. Might is right. This is the way of the world. Okay, so when the revolution comes around and the real cosmic justice comes, right? They actually suddenly become sentimental and moralists. Oh, the persecution of the victims of Red Terror and Stalinist persecution. And they simultaneously are the biggest fucking whining moral bitches in the fucking world who are waving crosses and talking about Jesus and how moral and saintly they are. While simultaneously, whenever they're put in a position of actual authority and responsibility in any kind of way, will go out of their way to celebrate and justify moral depravity. And say that, yeah, this makes me the cool guy. Yeah. I'm the cool guy. I'm the cool guy for advocating killing babies. I'm a cool guy for wanting to slaughter babies and just massacre civilians and destroy nations and ruin nations. That makes me the cool guy. You're just a whining moralist. I'm the cool guy, right? Believe it or not, this is just a fundamentally twisted, I would even call it a metaphysical posture. It's an absolutely false ideology and worldview, which I'm going to dedicate this stream to breaking down at a more fundamental level. First, I'll address what Nick Fuentes is saying, on a more bare bones level, which is that the reason it's important to recognize the right to self-determination of nations is because that's what you expect other nations to do for you, right? It just, if you want to look at it in a cold calculating sense, there is more of a global security when nations recognize and respect their respective boundaries. That if your goal is to develop your country to prevent preventable diseases, to uplift the people in your country, to improve education rates, to improve your quality of life, your standard of living, the level of culture within your country. If you want to improve these things, you don't want to constantly have to be fighting wars because those take away from that. You want a logic of development like China. That's how you actually put America first, or you put your own country first. Because the real war is at home. The real war is the problems we have to solve at home. It's true for every nation on earth. So the framework of respect for the principle of national self-determination, that's not just some abstract moral bullshit. The purpose of that is just to give nations breathing room to just develop without having to constantly be at war, which is something Europe was doing for a century. During the 19th century, and then during World War I, and then to an extent during World War II, right? So if you don't like morality and you just want to hear what the argument is, just strictly and solely from that perspective, that's what it is. Now, and hear me out here, let's say, okay, well, that's not the world we live in. We don't live in a moral world. Nations are inevitably going to violate the right to national self-determination. And this is what I would call cosmic insecurity, right? That if you act as an upright, virtuous, and moral person, you're going to get screwed over for it in the end. It's going to be taken for weakness. But all we have to do is look at the example of Nazi Germany versus the Soviet Union to disprove this. Okay? The Soviet Union was principled and consistent. Even in the invasion of Finland, they absolutely had a justification for that. Because if you know the history of Brest-Litovsk, and if you know the history of the revolution within Finland after 1917, and if you know the history of how Finland was constantly violating treaties and was basically setting up, turning its country into a launching pad for the Nazi invasion, Soviet claims to Karela were absolutely justified on a historical level, on a security level, like absolutely. Nazi Germany, in Mein Kampf, Hitler constantly talked about, I wanted to invade the Soviet Union, okay? Nobody just randomly wants to attack America. Nobody's talking about that. So these people, the neocon argument has always been, and I remember this even around the time of the Iraq War, what they basically always say is that we need to constantly be on like the cutting edge of just, being a global aggressor, or else we're going to be the weak ones, and others are going to invade and attack us. Well, that's not where true authority and power comes from. That's a type of cosmic insecurity, if you want. And what disproves it is Nazi Germany versus the Soviet Union. So the Nazis had that mentality. They had this cynical view that, we have to go and invade and conquer every country, or else they're going to do it to us. The Soviet Union had a very different view. They had the view that they respect the right of national self-determination of nations. They weren't even exporting revolution like Trotsky wanted. That's how much they committed to the principle. They weren't interested whatsoever in invading the world militarily and imposing whatever their will. They wanted to focus on internal development. So that was the Soviet perspective, and it was the morally superior perspective than the Nazis. So, what did the Nazis do? They tested the Soviets. They said, okay, well, you're just a sucker. The Nazis saw the Soviets as stupid and naive and yada, yada, yada. And then we have recordings of Hitler soying out and raging about how the Soviets produced like 33,000 tanks or something. And he's like, how the fuck was this possible? And the Soviets won and they prevailed. And that's what happens when you have strong morale. Morale is probably the most fundamental thing when it comes to war. Because morale, there's a reason it shares the common root word from moral, right? It's about moral authority. It's about having a superior principle. It's about actually being in the right. When you're in the right, throughout most of history, being in the right was also being aligned with cosmic order. Like, it wasn't just that you had this abstract morality. You were in the right. Like, even heaven itself agreed with you that you were in the right, right? That's the more ancient kind of understanding of justice, which was always very cosmological. But the Soviet Union was simultaneously in the right and also a mightier and more dominant power. So what's the lesson from that? If America focuses on internal development rather than attacking other nations, and if we insist upon the principle of right to national self-determination, well, if another nation wants to come and test that, then they can test it in the same way the Nazis tried to test the Soviet Union. Why wouldn't Americans defend their nation and homeland? Why wouldn't if we lived under a state that was actually that had moral authority, and we were unjustifiably attacked out of nowhere because someone had Hitler or Nick Fuentes' mentality, what young American man would not be the first to sign up, to sacrifice their lives to defend their homeland and their dignity and their motherland? We would be in the right. We would have such a stronger level of morale and cohesion as a society. We'd be so unified. We'd all be mobilized toward defending our country, defending our homeland, defending our motherland. And that's the most important thing of all, because when we wage wars now, we don't have that level of morale. We have, since the Vietnam War, widespread resistance by the U.S. population to military actions by our government because we're not in the right. So if people are confused about what morality means, like just strictly in this sense, you need it to have morale. We didn't have morale in the Vietnam War. And you know what? I'll go on a limb and say this. Like, that was probably... That was a huge factor for why we lost that war. Now, granted, the morale didn't start radically deteriorating until the U.S. started getting fucking destroyed by the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese, right? The NVA. But simultaneously, there were two ways to react to the losses and casualties suffered by the U.S. military in Vietnam, the defeats and the setbacks. Sure, if we went into Vietnam and it was a cakewalk, maybe the American people in a swine-like way would have like just said, oh, this proves that we're correct about the nature of the cosmos, that might is right, or yada, 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 right? But that's not what happened. So that's when morale became decisive. See, when the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union with the Blitzkrieg, the Soviets initially suffered tremendous losses and tremendous defeats. But there were two ways of interpreting that. Okay, we're losing. Now all we have are our principles. Now all we have is our morale. Willingness to fight and die for our motherland. Are we going to let these bastards win? No, we're in the fucking right. We have the moral superiority. We're not going to fucking let this happen. They believed it. And they turned the tides of the war. Okay? That didn't happen in America in the Vietnam War for a reason. When America started suffering defeats at the hands of the Viet Cong and the NVA, the population then had to consult the stars, so to speak. And what I mean by that is they had to think about the moral significance of what they were doing. Hold on, we don't even have the fucking right to be here. Like, they had to interpret it in that way because we didn't have the right. See, morale becomes decisive when you can't just rule, when you can't just fucking fight wars on the basis of, like, absolute superiority. There's no such thing as the ability to win a war in the long term without moral authority. That's why the hearts and minds doctrine was so important in Iraq. And it failed, by the way, because, again, we didn't have the moral authority that was actually decisive for the goals of the U.S. and the region to be accomplished. We didn't have the fucking right to begin with. The right. Because there's an inherent right and wrong that is materially and objectively a fact of cosmos and a fact of existence. So this is such a warped, twisted, and fundamentally false worldview. And by the way, he accuses us of being third worldists. First of all, you idiot Nick Fuentes, we are not advocating that the U.S. intervenes militarily on behalf of third world countries. When did we say that? We just said we should focus on our own problems and stop bothering and harassing and attacking the world. That's not third worldism. That's actually putting the best interests of your country first. And then second of all, this is the second like knockout prong that just completely fucking demolishes his entire position. You know, but first of all, who is the we here? Because the American people don't even have popular sovereignty. You're such an actual, like, fucking coward, spineless ball washer of the regime that you're pretending that your justification has any causal effect on whatever. The Zionist regime is just going to do whatever the fuck it wants without your input and without any regard for what we, the American people, think in the first place. Sure, by justifying it, I guess you feel more like you're partaking in this authority and you're not being cucked like the little bitch you actually are in actual reality. But the truth is, like, this is Nick Fuentes' position in essence. He is a cuckold, and the bull, his wife's boyfriend, is taking her, out to fine dining. And Nick Fuentes is peeking outside of the window, and he's going, yes, this is what I wanted. Give her that steak. Give her those mashed potatoes. This is exactly what I wanted. I thought she should go to that Yeah, 7-star Michelin restaurant. This is what I want for her. And he's like cheering outside of the window as his wife's boyfriend is taking out his wife to dinner. And I could get more vulgar, because then his wife's boyfriend takes her back. And this is assuming this is a heterosexual man. I mean, that's not true. Let's be honest. But for the analogy, I guess, it's like, his wife's boyfriend then takes her back to his place, and then Nick Fuentes is also being a peeping Tom. This is the exact position she needs to be fucked in! Oh yeah! Let's do it! Yeah, keep fucking her! Keep fucking her! This is exactly how I think she should be fucked. Buddy, you're not the one doing the fucking. You're the fucking cuckold watching like the little bitch you are. That's exactly what this is. So when he's talking about U.S. foreign interventions in this way, and the way the U.S. regime is doing this around the world, keep that in mind. We don't have popular sovereignty. The American people are being cucked. That's what's going on. Because we have a Zionist, yes, we have a Zionist-run regime that does whatever the fuck it wants, and it doesn't have to give a shit about what we think, because there's nothing we could fucking do about it in the first place. The only recourse we could have against something like this would be Congress. Let's ignore the fact that Congress is bought and paid for, and it's absolutely not a representative of the American people. Even then, the regime doesn't care about what Congress wants. So it's like, if there's nothing you could do about it in the first place, is this really you, dude? I mean, does it really fucking matter if you support this or not? Yeah, it does matter, and I'll tell you why. You're a fucking shill and a ball washer of the regime among dissidents. You're trying to fucking spread an ideology of cuckolds among American dissidents. You're trying to take away their ability to have an actual counter-hegemonic position, and you're trying to tell other American dissidents who are against our regime and want the American people to be free to sit the fuck down and watch their wife get fucked. That's what you're fucking saying. You're a fucking cuck, and you're advocating for the cuckoldry of the American people on behalf of the blood-sucking banksters who are the sole class of people that benefit from any U.S. foreign interventions and any U.S. global policy whatsoever. The long-term trend of U.S. global foreign policy has corresponded to deindustrialization and the devastation of the American nation and every conceivable level you think about it. And this is what people don't get, because they're like Nick Fuentes. They're these fucking shills and little bitches. Everything the American people have earned, they did by force. There was a leverage. The organized labor movement was the only leverage the American people had, plus the pressure that was coming from the Soviet Union. So when those two things were dismantled, that's when shit started getting worse for the American people. Because we're not ruled by a class that wants to do good by this country. We're ruled by a class that doesn't care about the majority of the American people. A class which includes Zionist Jews, which includes generational, bloodlines and wealth, monopoly capital, Rockefellers, Morgans, you fucking name it. They do not care about the prosperity of the American people, because what's in it for them? Because they have the same mentality Nick Fuentes does. The filthy, disgusting, bourgeois worldview, according to which this is a world of total depravity and, antisocial, savage, acts of self-interest and selfishness and self-gain. That's actually virtue. Jacking up the price of insulin drugs and all this stuff, and elderly people dying on the street because they can't afford medicine. That's the law of the jungle, and you're virtuous. You're virtuous if you cause these kind of things to your own benefit, right? So this is the disgusting, filthy, standard capitalist bourgeois worldview that they confuse for realism. That's not realism, it's just Satanism. And that's why I found it necessary to make this stream about morality in a lot of ways, because people don't understand the Marxist view of morality at all. It's radically different from the liberal and bourgeois kind. And I wanted to explain that, right? I wanted to go at lengths to explain that. So it's like Nick Fuentes is cheerleading for the Zionist-controlled regime, and I guess he's interpreting it in a way that, I guess aligns with his ideology. But the actual causes behind the actions of the regime have nothing to do with Nick Fuentes' ideology or principles. They have everything to do with the immediate short-term interests of the capitalist class, of the Zionists that rule the regime, including the Zionist Jews. They kind of reproach by saying, oh, you don't think Americans benefit? Both third worldists and these Nazis have this reproach. You don't think Americans benefit from U.S. imperialism? Actually, they don't. They really don't. And I can explain perfectly why. Because U.S. imperialism has come at the expense of our domestic productive forces, of our domestic ability to have industry and infrastructure and so on and so on, both because of the costs of war. But in addition to that fact, you've given the capitalist class a way out from actually having to develop our nation and invest in our nation. If they could just steal and plunder resources from other nations, why would they invest in America? If you want to look at it from this cheap, cynical perspective, right? And then, you also have to qualify, what does it mean benefit? So for example, if we know that in the future the bubble is going to pop and this cannot go on indefinitely, if you keep giving a heroin addict doses of heroin, in this case the heroin is the credit system, is the heroin addict benefiting from that? Well, if you look at it from the perspective of, what does a heroin addict want in the short term, then I guess. But the heroin addict's going to overdose and die eventually. And our version of heroin is debt. All of these foreign interventions are to maintain our financial system, which is insolvent, which is ready to collapse at any moment. And this is a desperate scramble to do anything they can in any kind of way they can to keep the Ponzi scheme going. The same Ponzi scheme that's led to $40 trillion in debt. What prevents that from being collapsed is giving these money managers the ability to securitize the assets of foreign nations, whether that's through, foreign interventions, color revolutions, regime change, or whether that's through IMF loans, whether that's through things like the Javier Milei experiment in Argentina. The whole point is they want to collateralize other countries' wealth and assets, which gives them a better leverage, right, to continue pumping out credit, because the whole economy is surviving off of credit. And that's not sustainable. To keep the balance sheets solvent in the short term, they have to continue doing this. It's all a bunch of financial woo. And like Chris Morlock said, it's not even about oil. Even the third worldist stereotype of America stealing other countries' resources and turning those into commodities that Americans produce, that's not what's going on. What's going on is that we're stealing other countries' resources and assets to further collateralize and protect the financial system. And yes, this does actually, in the short term, give Americans the ability to take out their credit cards and I guess buy things that they can't afford in the short term. And if that's how the American people are benefiting, that's just no different than a fucking heroin addict. Because the key thing is that in the long term, it's not sustainable. Because if the United States does this to the entire planet, eventually you're going to run out of, the same systemic dysfunction and contradiction is going to catch up to you. It's going to catch up to you either way. In order to have wealth, you need to produce wealth on a material level. And you can't get around that. You can't, and China understands that. That's why China focuses so much on high-speed rail and on infrastructure and on investing in tangible scientific innovations and That's why China invests in its material economy. Because when China has a credit system, but China's credit system is, their balance sheets look good. Because China's financial system isn't based on a lie. When China makes a loan, like, it's not a lie. There actually is going to be a way it's going to be paid back. Okay, when the Chinese government takes out credit, it's not a lie. The credit is going to be paid for by the actual material wealth produced. That's not the system we have. That's why we have to do this nonsense in Venezuela, right? And again, it's like there's this wisdom these people think they have. Oh, always be on the offensive. And it's like, no, first of all, always be concordant with the principles of cosmos, okay? With some kind of principles. Even if that means you're in a defensive posture, that's okay. If someone wants to test you, that's when you're going to be tested, okay? Wait till someone tests you. Oh, that's a position for suckers who are going to lose. Okay. Nazis versus Soviet Union. Who lost? Who was the aggressor and who was the actual victor? The Nazis were the aggressor on the offensive, but the victor was the Soviets. So, I mean, people should learn from that. People should learn from the meaning of that. Okay? You don't need this cosmic insecurity where you feel like you have to put others down for you to be lifted up. You can actually just focus on lifting yourself up and not worry about others. And if others want to tear you down, then you have the right to defend yourself. And when you have the right to do something, you have the morale that allows you to unify your army and your people around it. And that's how you actually fucking win wars. Jesus Christ. All right, so let's I'm gonna unpause these super chats.
Based.
B.
The
Chong,
world
what's up?
outnumbers the right by a large margin, let alone talk about the right is splintered. So if you take America's total world population of 4%, divide it down further from the left-right L.
Absolutely. Yo, I have. What's up, bro?
The revolution unites man with divine, cosmic material. We follow the red star, glowing star emoji.
Absolutely, but I'm going to get into more detail. Emilio, what's up?
The rightist cries out as he strikes you.
That's why, though. I explained that's why they do that. The reason they do that is because the reason they're Yo,
What's
Keon,
the
what's
party
up?
stance, or your own, on the recent developments of a Black Panther
I'm not
party?
familiar.
Do you see them as resembling that party for socialism of the past?
I'm not familiar with them at all. I only saw a clip of them where they were doing open carry. Beyond that, I have no familiarity with them. But, yeah. So, okay, so I think it might be a good time to talk about the Gabriel Rockhill, Zizek type of thing and how this might be related. The thing I'm excited to talk about is the astrology stuff, so I might have to save that to the end, right? But basically, I want to just, like...
Oso's White Tequila added 5 to the War Chest Gulag Gang. W stream as always raised fist.
So, bro, appreciate you. Yeah, the astrology thing I want to talk about because there's just a Donald Redditson and some other people are saying, you know, this proves I'm a cult leader or whatever. Which based. I like to see myself more as a charismatic Sufi leader, you know, a leader of a Sufi order. Anyway, we'll actually, in all seriousness, we'll get into it. But in any case, and I want to actually preface this by saying, okay, first of all, shut the fuck up about horoscopes. At no point was I talking about horoscopes. At no point was I talking about, and this is why this has always been an esoteric thing. Because when the masses get hold of this ancient cosmic wisdom, they start doing stupid ass shit with it. They petty superstition and fortune telling on the street, and like idiots running around in my Discord talking about their horoscopes and shit. This is petty superstition. It's feudal backwardness. So shut the fuck up. I don't want to fucking hear that. I don't want to hear you talking about. We're not talking. I resent the word astrology, okay? Because it was clearly being misunderstood to mean like petty astrology and horoscopes and shit. Like here in my head, I'm thinking about like the auspicious conjunction.
Heidegger was just right. Truth is unconcealment. It's just the law of the universe.
Thank you, Emil. I appreciate you. So, you know, I'm here thinking about the auspicious conjunction. I'm here thinking about what Michael Hudson talked about, how there was an ontology, ontocosmology that the most ancient human societies had, where they would chart out their migration patterns and their rituals and their kind of meeting places at sacred temples like Stonehenge on the basis of astronomical cycles, which they gave a cosmic significance to, right? In relation to their society and like the way the Babylonians came up with their numerical system because of their astronomy, the Egyptian, like this is what I'm thinking about. And then meanwhile, motherfuckers are sitting here like, I'm a Pisces. Like, dude, shut the fuck up. I don't give a fuck about that. All right? All that shit is fake. I'm talking about something entirely different, okay? And I'll explain how that's related to Marxism very specifically and materialism, because a lot of people, I mean, I almost don't like that Shattering Hegemony made that post. I'm going to be honest. Because I saw like these disgusting Redditors, I don't consider them human. I don't consider they have this knee-jerk reaction. Oh, that's not very materialist of you, Haas. Oh, I never would have thought of that. It's not like I thought this through. Oh, yeah, I'm just some dumb guy that never thought of that. You're right. It's like, give me a fucking break, you amateur bitch. Shut the fuck up and sit down, okay? Fuck are you talking about? Like, I haven't thought of that. Like, shut the fuck up, literally. I don't just say shit for no reason, okay? Like, it's such a predictable, stupid response. Okay, I'll get into the cosmism thing, because it's a bigger bombshell, and it's a bigger pill than the Lysenko pill. If I see a single knee-jerk react in my comments, I'm going to, like, write your name on a list in Eternal Retard Hall of Fame, and I'm going to share it next stream, right? Anyway, I'll clarify exactly what I mean. What does Haas mean by cosmology, right? I don't like calling it astrology. Okay, so let's talk about Gabriel Rockhill. So if you don't know Gabriel Rockhill, he's created this like milieu of people who are like, there's a new scholarship on the origins of the Western Marxist Academy, and like shit that has nothing to do with actual French theory. Like Kojève, Georges Bataille, Lacan, Deleuze, Lyotard, Baudrillard, Derrida, like all the interesting people that people associate with the French school, like, are in a completely different school of thought than Marcuse. Okay, so Rockhill kind of like points out how the NED, or the Congress for Cultural Freedom, you know, bankrolled the Frankfurt School. Yeah, we know. I mean, there's no new information as far as I'm concerned. But but I don't understand the appeal. The fact that the bourgeois hegemony, like, what does Rockhill expect? Do you think that in bourgeois institutions they're going to let you be like a supporter of Hezbollah or something? Like, what do you think? I don't understand like the surprise and shock aspect of this. So that's why I said he's a mediocre thinker, because he's not introducing anything that a 5-year-old couldn't just infer from like the most rudimentary common sense. He's a mediocre thinker, straight up. There's two senses in which Rockhill's a mediocre thinker. The first sense is that he has nothing insightful to share. Western Marxism was invented by the CIA. Okay, but that's what we've been saying, and you called us Nazbols for it, okay? Then the second thing he says is that, you know, thinking about ontology and philosophy and all this stuff is a waste of time. It's windbaggery. Zizek is a court jester of capitalism, and I'm going to analyze how these people get salaries and how they get paid. But am I going to actually like have my own position, my own theoretical stance and position on anything, literally anything at all? No. Am I going to develop an alternative worldview in any? No. All I'm going to do is like analyze the system of how salaried academics are paid and how that incentivizes them to come up with views that don't challenge their paymasters. Okay. What is he giving us here, right? Like, okay, what is the truth, though? Okay, all these people are shills. Okay, so what's the truth? Well, he always like, well, you know, socialist Vietnam and all these other countries have these great achievements. I agree. How do we translate that concretely into Western countries? He's like, well, the reason we haven't been able to do that is because of Foucault. No, Rockhill, it's not because of Foucault. Okay, I promise you that every single ML cult that's formed in the past 50 years didn't read Foucault, okay? I promise you that like all these weird like sects that constantly are forming in this country in America and throughout history never heard of French theory, okay? The CPUSA itself, after the Khrushchev secret speech, they were not reading the Frankfurt School, okay? Moreover, what happened with that whole thing, Rockhill, with Khrushchev and revisionism? Do you have an explanation for that at all? Did Foucault tell Khrushchev to be a revisionist? There are deep problems with Marxism in the West, not simply including, yes, because of the CIA and the obvious, the regime, but also because there's imminent problems with Marxism in the West. There are genuine inconsistencies as far as how Marxist intellectuals have articulated Marxism as a worldview in the West. There's an inability to develop a coherent and effective praxis. That is the number one crisis and the number one issue. How do you actually create something and build something positively? Instead of just pointing out all of the wrong paths, which are just obvious, what's the right path? I challenge Gabriel Rockhill to provide guidance on how to form a communist party, how to do this, and how. As far as I'm concerned, this guy hates us, and he hates the ACP. So give us an alternative. Show us how it's done. That's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see how it's done. Okay? I'm not even getting into the weeds of why his argument's false, why you do need people like Zizek and all these other eclectic thinkers. I'll be happy to get into that. No, he's not in PSL. So he's like, if you can't prove you have an effective praxis, your theory is garbage. And what's the praxis corresponding to Rockhill's theory? Getting a fucking magnifying glass and you know, looking at the revenue streams for the transgender, bigendered, trigendered, Foucault, Nietzschean nonsense stuff that's coming out of these like random graduate schools. Okay. How are you not equally a fart sniffer if that's your praxis? You're worse than a fart sniffer. At least a fart sniffer is producing a new sensation, however unpleasant. You are the guy sniffing it and calling that praxis. That's not praxis. Okay, so why would I insist nonetheless, though, that French theory isn't total nonsense, that Zizek isn't total nonsense, that even Badiou, who I fundamentally disagree with, isn't total nonsense, that you should take Lacan seriously, you should take Heidegger, Kojève, all these, you know, all these bourgeois, rich kid, you know, what does this have to do with common sense? Okay, buddy, put it back in your pants, okay? Because this is the problem. People don't realize that you don't have a pre-given correct revolutionary consciousness. I put into question and I doubt how you've articulated your revolutionary you who insist that we don't need this esoteric stuff and we can just jump right into the correct position. I don't trust that you have developed a revolutionary outlook or consciousness and cultivated one that I'd be willing to follow into battle. I think that every single type of consciousness that looks like that has just led to sectarian formations that go nowhere and become cults. That's the number one problem we have in Western countries, actually. It's not that people think too critically. I fundamentally reject Adorno. I think he's an awful thinker. And I think he's a poisonous. I think people who draw conclusions from him. I agree that the conclusion people draw from Adorno is to shun the world. To shun every real example of communist praxis. I agree. But you're just confusing the German and French schools, But nonetheless, it kind of circles back and begs the question, because I remember a commenter, reproached me with this in the comment section of the video I did with Carlos in the Midwestern Marx comment section. They're like, okay, Haas, you're talking about Heidegger, you're talking about Dugin, you're talking about Slavoj Zizek. Why don't we just have Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, and Mao? And I want to actually respond to that, right? First of all, of course, that would be wonderful if we could just have those thinkers. But there's a problem of just out of context reading those thinkers in 2026, which is very simple to understand. The division of mental labor was less expansive during the time in which every single one of those thinkers lived than now. What does that mean? So, as a mode of production develops, there's an increased specialization of all fields of the division of labor. This is basic Marxism. So, for example, under feudalism, I guess, peasants were pretty much doing a lot of their own thing. They were growing their own food. They were weaving their own clothes. They were doing all these things by themselves, right? But then as society develops, there's an increase of the division of labor, which frees up labor and time. And it allows specific departments to be created of the total division of labor that are solely dedicated to a specific practice, right? So instead of a peasant doing everything at the household level, we're going to have a guild that's focused on manufacturing fabrics and clothes. We're going to have on and on it goes, basically, right? So there's an increase of the expansion of the division of labor that corresponds to history, okay? And this is true for the history of capitalism. Mental labor has become far more specialized today than under Marx's time or Lenin's time or Stalin's time or even Mao's time. And what consequences does that have for our ability to actually properly contextualize those thinkers when we attempt to interpret them and read them today? So this is what I want to talk about. Well, first of all, I want to point to the example of how did we get Lenin from Marx? Because there's a huge gap between Lenin and Marx. It's like a half a century gap. To be generous, I guess. You have almost a half a century gap between Lenin and Marx. And then from Lenin to Mao, we'll talk about, we could also talk about. But the most important thing is the transition of Marx to Lenin, right? So in Marx's time, you didn't have a very neat division of mental labor. You had a more kind of integral type of mental labor that encompassed a lot of different fields. Marx and Engels, they had their hands in a little too many cookie jars for today's sensibilities. I don't think they did, but for today's sensibilities, they did. Marx and Engels developed a worldview that crossed the boundaries of philosophy, natural science, which at a certain point in history was called natural philosophy. It was considered a type of philosophy. It encompassed political economy. It encompassed biology and anthropology and physics and thermodynamics and you name it, geology and cosmology, actually. And it was a really they were integral thinkers. That's why it's hard to categorize Marx and Engels. Were they philosophers? Were they scientists? Were they this? They were that? Or Marx and Engels are inceptual thinkers of the modern age. You can't put them in a box according to the mental division of labor, because the context they were working from took for granted that all of these things were interrelated. And that interrelation was taken for granted by Marx and Engels and their contemporaries for a larger extent than today. Back in the day, things were closer together than they are now. Now things have become more specialized and separated. And that's like a kind of index of historical change. As history advances, the division of mental labor increases. All the divisions of labor increase. They become more complex. So if you want to think about this in the most fundamental way, in hunter-gatherer societies or caveman times or whatever you want to put it, in a prehistoric age, there was the division of labor encompassed a small band of 100 or 200 people. And it was so immediate, it was so seamless, and everything, people think that there was just this primitivism and everyone was stupid. No, there was a profound, such a profound sensibility primitive peoples had, because everything was just integral, right? Now, there wasn't this radical alienation and separation of everything into different divisions of labor. So everything was so seamlessly interrelated. And the stars, the environment around them, the way of life, how they interact with each other, the philosophy, the science, and these things were not really primitive when you think about it. They were just as potent and rich with the density of moral authority and richness, right? And wealth, moral wealth. The thing is that they just they were not as divided as they are now, right? So they were such a profound kind of big worldview that even primitive peoples had, right? So, I want everyone to accustom themselves to the fact that the long-term trend of history is the increased complexity of the division of labor. And that's the principle of the development of private property, as per Marx himself. This is the logic of private property and alienation. Now, on the one hand, the increase of the division of labor helps the productive forces, but on the other hand, it gives rise to the alienation of man to himself, because man no longer relates to himself as an integral, rich totality of determinations, but rather a specific kind of subdivision whose connection to the totality is lost and forgotten almost entirely in the trajectory of the development of private property, that is. And that's alienation, according to Marx. So that's why, how does Marx describe communism as a kind of hypothetical? That's why he said under communism, a man can fish in the evening and write in the afternoon and play ping pong in the morning or whatever. He didn't say that, but you get the idea. And he says, all without having become a fisherman or a writer or a guy who plays ping pong. And he said, that's communism, right? Well, he was addressing and talking about the alienation corresponding to the division of labor. Okay, so I know that I've hearkened on this point constantly, and I want to kind of get to the point, right? That you're all waiting for. How does this relate to Rockhill and Zizek and all these other thinkers and so on? Well, okay, so when Lenin was developing as a Marxist and, became an active social democrat and I would call an active Marxist, he did not have the same context as his contemporaries in Germany, where Marxism was increasingly becoming departmentalized. So Marx was becoming a household name for Philistine professors, liberal German professors in universities who were trying to domesticate him. Social democracy, which had become a mass movement in Germany, and which became heavily kind of professionalized and gave way to bourgeois tendencies, acquiescing to the hegemony. You know, they also domesticated Marx for convenience. They were domesticating him. So Marx was this, you know, Marx himself, the real context of the principles guiding his thought is extremely integral. But then with the development of social democracy, it becomes departmentalized. And other aspects of Marxist thinking became forgotten and were lost. And this is what Lenin discovered. He had to discover this fact for two reasons. One, that trajectory didn't happen in Russia. Russia did not have a thriving and robust social democratic movement. So Lenin had to kind of articulate the principles of Marxism from scratch. So, you know, when World War I came around and the German social democrats and all the social democrats, most of them, became social chauvinists who voted for the war and revealed themselves as just shills bought and paid for by the hegemony like AOC and like Zoran, you know, Lenin was kind of shocked, but then that's what awakened him to the fact that they forgot a lot of things about Marx that were inherent in Marx because the context of social democracy was not only radically different than Marx's context, it occupied a much narrower division of labor within society than the one occupied by Marx, at least as far as his thinking was concerned. So Lenin rediscovers Marx that would have been forgotten. Lenin, for example, in The State and Revolution, he discovers Marx, the revolutionary. Marx, the guy who called for the abolition of the state machine. The smashing, I should say, of the state machine, the imperialist bureaucracy and state machine. You know, the Marx who advocated for this kind of populist alliance between the French small subsistence farmers and the French urban workers. The People's Revolution on the continent is what Marx would call it, right? There's all these things about Marx that got conveniently forgotten because Marxism was turned into a kind of specialized, unique kind of like separate thing within the total division of labor of bourgeois society. So, but isn't it curious, how exactly did Lenin, and this is the key word I want you to take away, and this is the bulk of my critique of Rockhill, how did Lenin reconstruct the context that allowed him to properly interpret Marx in ways that didn't confine him to the narrow Philistine division of labor that the German Social Democrats had to confine themselves to? Well, here's the most interesting and profound thing. What Lenin did is he crossed divisions of mental labor into issues that, according to German social democracy, were already long resolved long ago. Lenin first had to do this in his polemics with his philosophical contemporaries in imperial criticism, but he had to do it a second time when he was in exile, when Lenin reread Hegel. Now, a Philistine German social democrat would have said, "Why are you reading Hegel? That's already been resolved. Why are you relitigating these issues already resolved?" When in fact, history showed they weren't resolved. It was necessary to go back to that to properly reconstruct the context that gave rise to Marx.
10 to the war chest. Keep up the work.
CJ,
Chairman.
thank you, bro. Appreciate you. It was necessary to reconstruct the context of Karl Marx. Going back to Hegel, relitigating philosophical issues once thought resolved. But they weren't resolved, they were just forgotten. Now, what does that kind of sound like? It kind of rhymes with Heidegger's idea of the forgetting of being. That rather than resolving the problem of being throughout the development of history, what we're actually doing is forgetting about it in new and in interesting ways. And that's kind of squares with the Marxist notion of alienation corresponding to the development of private property. We are forgetting about this kind of, in this sense, I mean, this is not what Heidegger thinks, but in this sense, we're forgetting about this kind of principle that governs an integral order, okay? An integral order of society and of history, where there's an interrelation of things, but the logic of this interrelation cannot itself be understood within the confines of one division of labor. You have to cross divisions of labor. You have to discover how these things are interrelated to discover the kind of integral principle of society, which another word for that is communism, right? So there was a forgetting of Marxist context. Issues thought resolved were not actually resolved. They were just forgotten in a way that couldn't have been foreseen by Marx. So Lenin has to relitigate old issues. Now that is quite profound. If Rockhill was alive as Lenin's contemporary, he would have been a German Philistine who said, this is all, smelling farts. It's a waste of time. The model the SPD showed actually works as a mass movement. Lenin, what are you talking about with this eclectic, crazy idea of the democratic dictatorship of the workers and the peasants? The German SPD, the social democracy is what works. Just do that. Just import social democracy. Right? That's effectively what Rockhill's position would have looked like back then. But thankfully, Lenin didn't content himself with mere dogmas of Marxist theory. He strove to reconstruct the context that made Marxism meaningful in the first place because he couldn't afford to take it for granted in the nation that he lived in, which was Russia. Unlike Germany, there's a reason Lenin came from Russia and not Germany. So the key thing is this notion of reconstructing context. Now, as history develops, we see other thinkers do this, like Mao Zedong. Now, if Mao was a follower of Gabriel Rockhill, he would not have relitigated the fundamentals of dialectics. He would not have relitigated, the fundamentals of, should Marxism be cynicized? Can we cynicize Marxism? Can we have socialism with Chinese characteristics? Mao relitigates a lot of issues that, under Stalin's watch, should have been long resolved long ago. But they weren't for Mao, because Mao found it necessary to, in his own way, reconstruct the context that made Lenin meaningful in the first place. And that's why China's survived today and the USSR hasn't. Because a Philistinism prevailed in the USSR because of this kind of subordination of Marxism-Leninism to a narrow sphere of the division of labor. What happened in the USSR? Marxism-Leninism became a dead, dry dogma that was associated with sterile bureaucracy, and the real soulful, spiritual impetus of the Soviet peoples was elsewhere. And so it's like something that happened, the revisionism of social democracy, had happened to the Soviet Union. Because there wasn't this constant effort to reintegrate amidst new thresholds of the division of labor.
Added 10 to the war chest.
CJ, what's up, bro? Thank you so much. So, in Russia and in China, the fact that there's an integral totality that cuts across divisions of labor under one principle is given. That's given to the Russian worldview. I mean, Dostoevsky would agree with that. If you read Russian authors and Russian poetry and literature during the Silver Age and so on, it's just like a standard Russian worldview. Same thing with the Chinese. The Chinese have a cosmic view. They call it heaven, okay? Heaven, human resonance. We're going to talk about that. in the third segment of tonight's stream, the heaven-human resonance. But these were all integral kind of civilizational worldviews that the Chinese and Russians could take for granted. That's how they were able to reconstruct the context of thinkers like Karl Marx, even when the logic of the development of the division of labor confined them to kind of narrow fields. That's why if you read Lenin, he always uses this word Philistine. You know what Philistine means? It's somebody who can't see the interrelation and connection of things across disparate divisions of labor, right? Somebody who's thinking in a narrow-minded way, who's not thinking about how everything's interrelated harmoniously, right, into one order. That's what Lenin meant by Philistinism, by the way, right? So, okay, what am I cooking up here? Since we're living in the West, we don't have for granted the kind of Chinese unconscious. We don't have the Russian unconscious. We don't have the Vietnamese unconscious. Whatever you have it. We have to seriously relitigate a lot of the things we take for granted because these are necessary for us to
CJ Young added 20 to the war chest.
CJ, thank you so much, bro. Appreciate it. We have to relitigate a lot of issues that were thought to be resolved long ago, such as ontology, the precise issues that Heidegger, Kojève, Deleuze, Lacan, Lyotard. What do you think Zizek thinks about and writes about? What is he actually writing about? Do you even know? He's exploring the question of how is what we call subjectivity possible? What is that? What is that? You know, what is the nature of being itself? What is being? How can we talk about it? What's the relationship of language to that? You know, how can we explain the relationship of desire to ideology, to all these kind of different things? Now, you may take that for granted, but the reason you take that for granted is because you're a Philistine, just like Karl Kautsky was. But if we actually want to be serious about truly understanding Marxism-Leninism in America, we have to reconstruct the context by crossing divisions of labor and, yes, relitigating issues that, according to our Philistinism, we would have thought resolved long ago. We can't take for granted the ontological dimension that Marx took for granted. We can't take for granted the dimension of phenomenology, the dimension of ideology, the critique of ideology. We can't take for granted what that actually means and what that refers to. We need to fundamentally relitigate these things, just because that's what's necessary to reconstruct an originally forgotten integral context. So that's my argument. Okay, this is what Gabriel Rockhill doesn't understand. Gabriel Rockhill, if you deign yourself to commit yourself to relitigating these issues in ways that are consistent with Marxist-Leninist praxis, hey, you're in the same ballpark as me and Carlos. But doing that means you got to play tango with these people that you dismiss as nonsense. You have to respond to them. You have to at least respond to them. You have to say this is how they're wrong. You can't just say this was a bunch of gobbledygook and nonsense. Because by doing that, you're taking shit for granted you just have no right to. Just because China and Russia were successful, and just because socialist construction was elsewhere in foreign countries, doesn't mean we automatically have the context to understand the keys to their success in a country like America. The cultural, the historical context is just, and the ideological, the psychological, like all these things are fundamentally different. So yeah, we have to do a lot to actually think. We have to think. I'm here to defend the integrity and necessity of thought. I don't agree with Zizek. I don't agree with any of the people I think are necessary to engage with to actually articulate a correct Marxist line in the 2026. But you have to speak their language. You have to kind of think about the issues that they're raising. Just because they're not resolving those issues correctly doesn't mean they're not issues in the first place. And that's really the hill I'm dying on. I don't think Zizek resolves the issues that he's responding to. But is he actually pointing out problems? Abso-fucking-lutely he is. How can you reconcile the notion of ideology with materialism? How do you reconcile Antonio Gramsci's notion of the relative autonomy of the superstructure with respect to the base with a consistent and correct dialectical materialist outlook? Like, love him or hate him, you know, Zizek actually is trying to develop a philosophy consistent with some kind of Marxism. A materialist dialect is what he likes to call it. You know, in his own interpretation. He rejects dialectical materialism, but that's actually what he's trying to do.
CJ Young added 20 to the war
CJ, thank
chest.
you, bro. Appreciate you. And, you know, so how do we actually... There's so many issues Marxism just has to tangle with, and I hate these simplistic Philistine responses that that's the real Western Marxism, is Philistinism. Because when you think about it, what unites Karl Kautsky, Edward Bernstein, Georgy Lukács, may Allah curse him and all his descendants, Gabriel Rockhill, well, they're all Philistines. They don't have an integral worldview. They don't have an integral cosmological worldview. They have a worldview that's based on, oh, it's so simple, let's just do this. Hey, wait a second. There's a lot you're taking for granted you just have no right to. So this is the substance of my critique. We desperately need to reconstruct the context of the 20th century communist experience. And we need to reconstruct the context of Marx and Engels. We absolutely have to. And I go further. We need to reconstruct the context of modern civilization itself. That's what I'm doing with my notion of Mongol modernity. We need to radically reconstruct the context of the inceptual premises upon which civilization itself rests. And that has immediate significance for a country like the United States of America, which is entering into a lawless type of barbarism where we're going to have to discover very ancient principles of civilization from scratch. So, you know, I feel like this is an extremely coherent point to make, you know? We need to reconstruct context that we've lost and that we've forgotten. And it just keeps, you know, I can even critique Marx and Engels for taking for granted the context of European Western modernity and not realizing how, in a lot of ways, I mean, they were open-minded to it, sure, but they had Hegelian philosophy, which was the most comprehensive and the most integral outlook the West ever produced. But there was a sacred cosmos taken for granted by Chinese. Need I remind you, Mao was more well-versed in the classics of Chinese literature than he was Marxism or Western thinking. There's the Chinese, there's the kind of Islamic, there's...
Dark NRG added 5 to
Dark,
the war
what's
chest.
up?
Mark Bar Unwiki Communists.
I mean, thanks NRG, I appreciate it. So, you know, by the way, for you guys super chatting, I'm just pausing them. I'm going to unpause them, you know, when I finish my point. So, yeah, I mean, that's what I'm talking about. And now I can't fully explain to you and summarize and introduce you to Zizek's thought and thinking and why that's necessary to reconstruct the context of Marxism-Leninism. But I'm just saying that this is my reasoning. I think that even though these thinkers are not communists, because people say stupid things to me. They're like, why are you promoting these non-communists over communists? And I'm not. It's a false dichotomy. The communists We're operating within a context that is either forgotten or obscure to us today. So in the interest of reconstructing that context, we have to consult non-communist thinkers that are occupying other spheres of the division of mental labor, rather than confine ourselves to a narrow dogmatic hug box. Karl Kautsky and Bernstein were in a narrow dogmatic hug box. And you know what Lenin did? He read Hegel, and he cited English liberal economists like Hobson. That was his name, Hobson. Read Imperialism, the Highest Stage. Could reproach on, why are you promoting Hobson, the liberal? Because Lenin had to reconstruct context. Because you can't take for granted the label communist. That's why. We need to know what communist actually means. To know what communist actually means, we need to derive communism out of non-communism. And that is a perfectly dialectical logic. If you take communism for granted, you're cornering yourself into a division of labor that is much narrower than the inceptual premises out of which the actual communist experience was born in the 20th century. So in the interest of not taking that context for granted, you need to explore non-Marxist and non-communist thinkers to reconstruct the context of how do we develop and articulate a distinct communist outlook concordant and commensurate with those of the past. Well, guess what? Hazaldin has done that. And I did it thanks to exploring heterodox, non-communist, and non-Marxist thinkers. That's how I got the context and the fuller picture that made me appreciate Marx, Engels, and Lenin, and Stalin, and Mao in ways that I doubt Rockhill and retard Daniel Tutt will ever be able to. Like, Dugin is relitigating issues that were taken for granted even by Hegel. Dugin is talking about the inceptual premises of to what does thinking even refer? What is a thought? To what extent are our modalities of thought embedded in unique contexts that are not necessarily universal, but which were presumed to be universal by European modernity? So these are all necessary to relitigating and reconstructing context is what communist activity looks like within the division of mental labor. Okay? The communist mental activity is about reconstructing the integral context that cuts across the division of mental labor. If communism is the riddle of history solved, and it's this world historical thing, you're goddamn right we have to go all the way back to the beginning. We have to go back to Genghis Khan. And we have to reconstruct the context of the Italian Renaissance and the most fundamental premises we take. You know who kind of does this, for example? This is another example. You know who does this in a way that's super interesting? Is Bruno Latour. Bruno Latour, who's trying to reconstruct the context of what is this thing we call modernity? And like, he kind of goes to the beginning and he's like, it's this kind of Gnostic heresy. It's rooted in alchemy and Gnosticism. And there's this specific strain of, you know, the Western esoterica that bursts out of the ground and becomes exoteric during the Age of Enlightenment. And, you know, I found that so interesting from Bruno Latour, an ostensibly non-Marxist, non-communist, politically a fucking reactionary. I'd even call him a fascist. He's like a climate fascist. I don't agree with him at all politically, but Bruno Latour is a fucking brilliant thinker. And, you know, Rockhill would say we have no business relitigating these questions. I beg to fucking differ. We have to relitigate these things that we take for granted. Lenin cited bourgeois economists to expose capitalism's laws. Zizek, hey retard, In this analogy, Zizek is not Lenin. We're supposed to be Lenin. And if we want to be Lenin, we have to consult non-Marxists and non-communists like Zizek. That's my whole fucking argument, you idiot. I'm not saying Zizek is on the level of Lenin. I'm saying if we want to be on the level of Lenin, we have to do what he did. Like, you're not even thinking about what I'm saying here. We have to relitigate philosophical issues that you would prefer we take for granted. Why is it so hard for people to and I'm yelling and they're going to ignore what I'm saying because the tone of my fucking voice. It's so infuriating. You didn't even think about it for 5 minutes. Am I saying Zizek is analogous to Lenin here? No, I'm saying we need to be like Lenin. Lenin didn't relitigate philosophy. He abso-fucking-lutely relitigated philosophical issues, and I'm not just talking about imperial criticism. I'm talking about when Lenin went in a fucking cave and just started reading Hegel again. The thing that's so inconvenient that you like to forget. When Lenin literally didn't have a clear idea of what really fucking went wrong, and he needed to go back to Hegel. Because he realized that Marxism had become something Philistine, it had become confined to a narrow division of labor that made it susceptible to revisionism. That's why Lenin relitigated Hegel, okay? In imperial criticism, that was just the Russian context where they couldn't take Marxism for granted. So yeah, he had to relitigate issues that in the immediate sense threatened praxis. But who's to say that these issues also don't pose a threat to revolutionary praxis today? We have Lenin's writings, we have Mao's writings, we have Stalin's writings, you have those fucking writings. Where the fuck have you been for decades? If it's so simple to fucking read them, and you just have to read what they wrote and fucking do it, why haven't you fucking done it? Oh, because Foucault prevented you from doing that? Who the fuck is gonna believe that? 95% of the retards running around calling themselves communists don't even fucking know who Foucault is. What the fuck is your excuse if it's so simple? We don't need to relitigate philosophy. We just do revolutionary praxis. The fuck does that look like? And why haven't I fucking seen what that looks like in this country since the fucking day I was born? See this rage I have? That was the rage Lenin had for Philistines. Foucault replaces political economy with discourse. Lenin never... Ya Allah! Ya Allah! Ya Allah! Who the fuck is comparing Lenin to Foucault? Who the fuck is comparing Lenin to Foucault? Who the fuck compared Lenin to Foucault? You're using Foucault as an excuse for not having followed Lenin. When the fuck did I say Foucault is a replacement for Lenin, or that Foucault is equivalent to he's rage baiting. That's what he's doing. He's rage baiting. I'm being rage baited. I'm being rage baited. I'm being fucking rage baited. Did you even fucking listen to what I said? Are you a bot? If it's so simple that all you have to do is confine yourselves to the classics of Marxism-Leninism and nothing else, well, we've had that for decades, and nobody seems to have produced any revolutionary praxis in America in decades. And you mean to tell me that Foucault is to blame for that? When 95% of communist retards calling themselves that don't even know who he is? Why would you then respond to me by saying, well, Lenin studied political economy, Foucault studied discourse? I heard a lot of nonsense about cosmology and fucking Zizek, you ranting plant. I didn't even get to the shit about cosmology, you fucking retard. This is the second segment. The cosmology is the third segment of the stream. Lots of metaphysics and name dropping, still no engagement with political economy or institutions. Who's preventing you from doing that, and why haven't you produced revolutionary praxis? Answer right now. Who's preventing you from studying political economy, right? Why are you talking about political economy? Oh, you think we don't engage with political economy, you fucking retard? Do you even know who we fucking are? This isn't Marxism, it's philosophical theater. Is this ChatGPT? Can you actually respond to the content of what I fucking said? That we can't take the context for granted, that we need to reconstruct the context out of which the inceptual method of Marxism arises because we lack a givenness of that context in our conditions and circumstances? Please just respond to that. Respond to that argument. Before you say we don't study political economy, yes, we fucking do. So I don't know why you're bringing that up. Can you respond to the content of my argument? No, actually, I want to watch these Rockhill ChatGPT bot drones try to fucking respond to a fucking argument. Throughout this stream, you didn't talk about political economy. What? Did Lenin talk about political economy in Imperial Criticism, you fucking retard? Does everything a Marxist ever does have to only be about political economy? Again, it's the mental division of labor. It's the Philistinism of the mental division of labor. You are Kautsky, you are Bernstein, you're a fuckbird. You're a fuckwit, you're a shitbird. Mannequin. Lenin didn't reconstruct political economy. He used it to analyze imperialism. God, please, if you're watching, I pray to you, give me the patience. God, give me the patience. God, give me the patience to deal with these shitbirds and retards and fucking subhuman scumbags. God, please give me the patience to deal with these Philistine retard, shitbird, Kautsky, Bernstein, follower, descendant, fucking glasses wearers. God, please give me the patience to not rage so much and when I read the filth and disgusting evil that these people produce in my fucking chat. God, please give me the fucking patience. I'm gonna give this person one opportunity to respond. You are a fucking bot. You are ChatGPT. Hey, you are ChatGPT. Here's what I said. I said Lenin had to reconstruct the original integral context of Marx's response to Hegelian philosophy in order to then correctly apply an analysis to political economy in the way that he did in imperialism. Meaning Lenin had to rediscover Hegel to actually articulate his theory of imperialism. I did not say he had to reconstruct political economy. Go ahead. If you don't respond, I'm banning you because you're fucking rage bait. That's all you are. Literal fucking rage bait. Lenin returned to Hegel because Marxism was being diluted by idealism, not because Marxism was lost. Retard, Marxism was being diluted by Philistinism, by revisionism. It was being diluted by idealism in the writing of imperial criticism when Lenin was responding to non-Marxists. You think Lenin went back to Hegel because he thought Kautsky was too idealistic, you idiot?
Yep.
Go ahead and respond to the argument. This is the biggest rage bait ever. It's like a rage bait bot. Imperialism wasn't the problem. Capitulation to bourgeois philosophy was. Bro, you're just babbling now. You're literally babbling like a fucking schizophrenic. This is Rockhill students, a literal retarded babbler. Imperialism wasn't the problem. Bourgeois philosophy was? Really? Is that a very materialist thing to say, you fucking idiot? Of course imperialism was the problem. But in order to understand the problem, Lenin had to relitigate philosophical issues that were thought to be resolved within Marxism, but really actually weren't. When I say Marxism, I mean the mainstream one, which is social democracy. Okay, he's a bot. We're banning this fucking retard. Imperialism clarified Marxism, revision and diluted. Okay. Do you think confusion and dilution are the same thing? I know that you're confused by French theory. I know it's really hard and confusing for you, but I'm here to, don't worry, it's because you're stupid. It's because you're a stupid, lazy fat ass. If you weren't such a fat ass, you'd put in the effort to understand. Because you're a fat ass and you're intimidated by big words and things that don't make sense to you right at the get-go, it's probably the same reason you don't want to read James Joyce. You don't want to read Shakespeare even. You don't want to fucking read classic literature because it's fucking hard to understand. Yeah, that's what fat ass people say when it's too hard to put their Twinkies down and fucking pick up weights. You're a spiritual fat ass. I have no sympathy with you. The reconstruction of context is my argument. This is the point you're avoiding. Zizek is anti-communist, that you're urging people to explore him. Okay, and in my own words, what's my argument? Why do I say people should explore Zizek? Or, hypothetically, people who are anti- or non-communist thinkers. Why might it be necessary to explore them, even if they're not communist or anti-communist? Repeat back to me my argument. Ask Grok what my argument was. Even Grok will tell you what my argument was. Can you repeat back to me my argument? I'll give you one chance to do this, and if you can't do it, I'm banning you for life. TikTok. Repeat my argument back to me. I understand Zizek's not a communist. I understand Dugin's not. I understand a lot of people I think are important thinkers aren't communists. But why do I think it's necessary for communists to read them? What's my argument? What did I actually say? You said that we shouldn't rely on the old guard of Marxism alone, and that figures like Zizek need to be engaged, analyzed, and worked through philosophically. That wasn't my argument. You didn't fucking actually articulate my argument. Because there's a why there. There's a key why. Why did I say that? The argument lies in the why. You're just repeating the prescriptive conclusion of what I said. You're not repeating the rationale behind it, which is the argument. So what was the argument? I'll give you one more chance. Why would I say something like that? Why did I say that? What reasoning did I give? Okay, the guy Lol is literally just rage bait troll. He's like a rage baiting troll. I refuse to believe someone exists who actually who would say this, given what I actually said. He quit. I'll wait. I'll give him one more chance. One more chance. What did you say that's wrong, you fucking idiot? Because I didn't say Zizek was a scholar of Leninism. I said there is a lost context of Lenin and Marx and Engels and Stalin and Mao. That there's a context they took for granted that because of the development of the division of labor, which applies to the division of mental labor, means they took many ontological, ethical, ideological, whatever you want to call it, psychological things for granted that were part of one integral totality for them, that were given to them, that split apart because of the development of the division of labor in the sphere of mental labor. And this forced their works to be read only within one of these splintered divisions of labor. So there's been a shattered integral totality. The integral totality they were taking for granted shattered like glass across time. Because the tendency of the logic of the development of private property, according to Karl Marx, is the increased specialization and development of the division of labor. So this is what happened to these thinkers. So when we try to just read Marx, Lenin, Engels, Stalin, and Mao, we're reading them from a very narrow perspective, or at least a much narrower perspective than the one they were able to take for granted, which was far richer as a concrete totality and determination, as an integral totality. So that was my argument. One's in this fucking chat if I'm speaking to people who understand my argument, or am I speaking in vain? I feel like it's so fucking simple. I'm not saying you have to agree with Zizek. What did I say about Zizek? I don't think he resolves the problems he's responding to correctly. But that doesn't mean the problems he's raising aren't problems. They are problems. And in order to understand those problems, you have to engage with the thinkers pointing them out in the first place. Why is everyone fucking missing me when I say that? Why is this violence necessary to get it across to you? Are you a shitbird NPC? I didn't say you have to agree with Zizek. You have to at least recognize the problems he's raising are real, even if he doesn't respond to them correctly. That's the fucking hill I'm dying on. We need to correctly resolve these issues so we can reintegrate a shattered totality of mental labor that all the classics of Marxism-Leninism were able to take for granted. If Lenin, Mao, and Stalin are... Hey, fat ass, I didn't call them narrow. I called motherfuckers like you narrow. I called people like you who interpret them under very narrow conditions and from a very narrow shit-lib, libtard fucking perspective with glasses on, because you're a fucking Philistine maggot. You're narrow. I said your interpretation, your perspective is narrow. It's rage bait. I'm fucking banning this guy. I'm banning this guy. I'm fucking banning this fucking guy. I fucking hate you, you fucking idiot, and don't you dare fucking say I didn't engage with what you said. You tore your shit apart, chewed it up, and spit it out, and it still came out smelling like shit. Whatever the fuck that means. Hide this bitch from my channel. Get the fuck out of here, you fucking idiot. If it's so simple to read Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, and Mao, go fucking do it. Every single retard like you has been doing that in the West without understanding what you're reading. You don't know what you don't even know what you're reading. I shit you not, some fucking retard just wrote a Substack claiming Stalin affirmed transgender rights, claiming that we're Nazi Bolsheviks and that what Stalin was talking about was transgender rights. Y'all go fucking do this shit and see where it fucking gets you. I shit you not. It's a Substack gaining traction of somebody who said Stalin and Mao, that the real context of Stalin and Mao apparently is transgender rights. And you're telling me these people have their shit together and they are in a position to interpret the works of Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, and Mao if this is how they're interpreting them? Good fucking luck with that. It's no wonder that for like a century now, Americans and people in the West have been unable to import or understand anything about the communist experience. For some reason, when I speak, instead of addressing the content of what I say, a fat ass eating Doritos and eating chips is like getting vibes about what I'm saying and then responding to his vibes. I speak very precisely and very carefully and meticulously, you fucking idiot. How's this big meanie Arab? Okay. That doesn't mean your fucking vibes are an authority on anything I'm fucking saying, you fucking idiot. I hate the stupid. I have rage and hatred in my heart for fucking willfully stupid fucking people. And if this is Rockhill students, Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ. If these are Rockhill students, Jesus Christ. Like, Jesus Christ. These are Rockhill's best students. You know, Zizek has a way of pathologizing certain impotent political subjectivities, which are so correct. You know, it's just so true. Like, you're sitting in some shitbird, ineffective, 5-person Maoist underground cult, and it's so pathological, and it's really a Zizekian analysis that will draw out the real logic governing your organization. And you just have no self-awareness. You're stuck in a prison of ideology and confusing that for reality. And yeah, you know what? Zizek absolutely is correct. To give us the tools, or at least the ability to think about ideology, pathology, and psychology in ways that you probably take for granted because you're a fat ass, and you assume your fat ass self is the revolutionary subject when you're not. Sorry, Captain Underpants. You can't just leap off a fucking building and start flying. It's not how it works. To hell with Marxist epistemology and philosophy. To hell with your pederast worldview, you bitch. Fuck are you talking about, you fucking idiot? To hell with you, bitch. What the fuck are you? Epstein? Epstein fucking follower? I'm a theocracy enjoyer. You're a fucking LARPer. Fuck you. Theocracy and Jesus Christ is what I'm fucking dealing with. Hold on. Something fucking wrong with my stream. Fucking YouTube. Oh shit. One's if the stream's still going. Okay, we're good. I don't know what's going on. All right. All right, we're good. We're good. We're good. All right. I want to talk about astrology. We're going to go through the super chats first.
Base.
Amila!
Oz, yes. That's it. The East never lost it. What being is?
Based.
GR, what's up, bro? Fuck am I getting notifications for a fucking follower for? Think I give a shit if you're following me? How do I turn this stupid shit off? It is turned off. I don't know what's going on. I could have sworn there's more super chats. There was Amila. All right, I guess not. Sumya, what's up? All right. I literally invented a fucking new insult called fuckbird. I don't know what that fucking means. I meant to say shitbird. I don't know what that fucking means. A fuckbird. Like a chirping fucking retard. Fucking retard fuckbird. NPC. You are literally less than a fuck. You are a chirping fuck. Parched on some fucking rooftop. Chirping in a robotic NPC way. American, what's up? Fuckbird. It's like a fuck that escaped the confines of a sexual interaction of man and woman and became an autonomous being that just harasses the shit out of everyone with their stupidity and retardation. And it takes the form of a bird somehow. Gabriel Rockhill's retarded students. Fuck y'all! Like, this is how stupid y'all are? Fuck y'all, literally. I don't give a shit about the politics. Fuck y'all for being so stupid. Coping retards with no self-awareness. Who think they've somehow what? Oh, finally, we can just read the classics without any mediation by modern theory. Okay, do it then. I love the pretense that like Western Marxist praxis has been held back by Foucault, like as if anyone knows who the fuck Foucault even is. Or Zizek. Oh yeah, the problem is that people take Zizek too seriously. I think that 99% of Zizek's readers don't even know what the fuck he's talking about, let alone have ever drawn a conclusion from anything he's ever said that has a practical effect on anything they've ever done. Pretty sure Zizek got canceled for being transphobic like 10 years ago anyway. Well, he's capitalism's court jester. Okay. Okay, so ignore the gesture. Give us the results of what the fuck what can you do? Like, think, you know what? Let me toot my own horn here. The only thing that's ever happened in America in terms of like communist politics was ACP. I beg to fucking differ. If anyone who disagrees, give me a counterexample. ACP put this shit back on the map. You think anybody gives a fuck about your stupid manifesto of your fucking stupid river collective, whatever? ACP put this bitch back on the map. And the vision for ACP, at least partially, came from a crazy, eclectic, schizophrenic motherfucker. Not a LARPing retard who just thinks you can read something from 100 years ago and properly interpret and understand it without any mediation. With all your presumptions and assumptions. Okay? Alright. Enough rage bait. I'm going to talk about astrology as a cult leader, right? So Donald Redditson, made a post. Haas believes in astrology, clown emoji. And then somebody said I'm a cult leader for affirming my belief in cosmic forces. I'm going to... Yeah, and everybody's rage baiting me now with the horoscope shit. It's funny. Everybody rage bait me. You see how people rage bait? You see how motherfuckers love rage baiting me? I don't give a shit about stupid ass horoscopes, alright? I want to talk about this. So, I want to talk about the notion of sacred cosmos first, from ancient history. And then I'll talk about Marxism. So, there's a lofty understanding that the phenomena within nature have some kind of resonance with the things that we regard as meaningful, you know, within the transcendental frame of human society and language. And the earliest form of, you know, articulating that resonance has been looking at the sky, I guess, right? And looking at the patterns in the celestial bodies and the stars. So one of the interesting things about Michael Hudson when he's cooperating with David Graeber in the sphere of anthropology to kind of analyze what's the origin of the temple system, what's the origin of what we call the state, and how the state began as a kind of mediation between different groups, not as a coercive body. I don't know if we can call it a state at this point, but the government, what is the origins of government at least, right? Well, government comes from, you know, these different bands, hunter-gatherer bands, whatever, usually nomadic, who kind of have this kind of common institution for mutual recognition where they'll have meeting places, you know, like Stonehenge, whatever you want to call it. And then, like, okay, over thousands of years, this develops into the temple of ancient Babylon and Sumer, right? But the interesting thing about these kind of original government structures, I guess, is that, first of all, they were what Michael Hudson in his word describes, you know, as can you guys pay attention? Should I just fucking end the stream? Like, can you fucking pay attention? What am I saying this shit for? Anyway, fuck's sake. They were rooted in an ontological, cosmo-ontological outlook that was shared by these people, right? So, celestial patterns governed migration patterns, seasonal celebrations, and the meeting places were not just seasonal on the basis of the Earth seasons, but patterns and cycles that were observed in the heavens. So this is the first, what we call the first societies that we can know of and that we can record, had this kind of, you know, astrological worldview where they attributed events that would happen and the right time to do certain things and when to hold these rituals and what effects they would have. All of this was related to and attached to their their observation of celestial patterns. So, this obviously develops into all pre-modern societies took astrology for granted, okay? And you really need to research this in depth to understand like just how much that's kind of omitted in the recording of history. A lot of the decisions made by rulers, I mean, it was a huge factor. Now, if we want to operate within a modern framework and say the astrology was all superstition, that wouldn't make it any less meaningful, because even, as an expression of this arbitrary relative autonomy of the superstructure, which is purely ideological relative to the base, it's a meaningful paradigm to look at why people made decisions when they did. Why did kings in ancient Babylonia go to war at the times that they did? Why did how did that figure into diplomacy and in dynastic patterns of dynastic succession? Especially at the level of dynastic succession, it was so fundamental, right? Now, the Chinese notion of heaven and the mandate of heaven is well known, but pretty much every society had something kind of similar to that. Timur called himself the master of the auspicious conjunction, which is an event where the Earth aligns with Saturn and Jupiter. Now, Jupiter is a planet, represents kingship and lordship and so on, and power. And then Saturn represents fate and destiny and will, right? So this is the auspicious conjunction which rulers, for, I guess, as long as we can record, they used it as an omen to kind of say this is a new dynastic era. This is heaven mandates the legitimacy of this new era, this new rule, this new government. And strangely enough, it does correlate to probably the most world historically transformative events. If we were to divide world history and in terms of world-changing events at the world scale, well, first, one of the closest auspicious conjunctions we can record was in 7 BC. Okay, so this is around the time that Jesus was born, and for some reason, Chinese astrology just marked the birth of Jesus, probably for this exact reason. And then there was other auspicious conjunctions, but the way they would measure the significance of it was how it looked in the sky. So maybe that was just superstition. It could very well have been. Not necessarily the degree of closeness, but just how it looked in the sky, right? But then the other most significant one was in 1226, which is the Mongol era, the era of Mongol world conquest. And Genghis Khan explicitly, made note of that and used it as a source of legitimation. And so did Tamerlane. He was also he also emerged at a time of an auspicious conjunction, right? And guess after 1226 since 1226, what is the most remarkable, according to the logic of the astrologers, auspicious conjunction? I'm just saying this because it's interesting. I don't even know what to believe, but it is interesting. After 1226, basically a millennia passes. Nothing matches that specific auspicious conjunction since 1226 until December 21st, 2020. So, I mean, at best, it's at least a little interesting. Or at the least, I would say, at the least, it's an interesting coincidence. If you want to cook a little bit, maybe this is maybe this explains why elites do things at the times they do. Because it doesn't necessarily have to mean anything, although I have my suspicions. And I can explain how that could be reconciled with a perfectly materialist worldview. I mean, it is a materialist worldview in a way. But maybe, those in power... look, something I can tell you with certainty is that governments buy into this shit. So maybe that's all it is. It's a superstition. It's just a coincidence. But because governments believe in it, it does kind of help explain why they make the decisions they do at the times they do. So why is it that the Great Reset happens after 2020? Why was 2020 like such a big reset? Well, on the one hand, it's a start of a new decade. But 2020 was pretty fucking crazy, right? So, who knows? But I'm not actually here to justify astrology, actually. That could perfectly you could just dismiss it as I don't really, it's not really my point. Because I'm less interested in, I think astrology is fun. It's fun. And, I have a personal view on that, which I don't want to justify to the public. Because there's also a problem with, whatever you want to call it, sacred cosmology or sacred cosmos, is that it gets vulgarized. So in the great dynasties, legitimates themselves, and it becomes a very fundamental worldview of imperial courts throughout history, and scientists throughout history were cooking with some interesting ass shit, artists. So people who know what they're talking about and who understand the subtle threads that hold us together in being, they kind of have this sensitivity to understand what is sacred cosmos, right? But then when this is taught to the masses, it becomes vulgarized and it turns into cheap superstition, right? So that's where you get the street fortune telling. That's where you get the kind of folk superstition. It becomes monetized usually. It's what happened in China. The government had to crack down on that, actually. People do readings. And then we have pop astrology today where people are talking about their horoscopes. And that can be harmless fun. I'm not here to shut it down. But I just... That's not on the same level of seriousness as what I'm talking about, if that makes sense. I don't take that that seriously, right? So I think that, the thing that people associate with astrology as folk superstition is feudal backwardness. The street fortune telling and all this nonsense, economization of the sacred cosmos, it's disgusting. And I'm glad the Chinese communists cracked down on it. I'm glad Jesus and the prophets of the Abrahamic tradition condemned it and cracked down on it. But that is not what I'm talking about, okay? So I just want to make myself absolutely fucking clear. I'm talking about the notion of cosmos. And what is the materialist Marxist relation to that? So, I don't know in what order I should present this. I just got done talking about Zizek, and I'd like to talk about Zizek in that light. But I think I'll talk about the Soviet cosmist worldview. So all cosmos means is order, the deeper order of reality, which sounds inherently metaphysical. If we understand that order to reflect ideal principles or thoughts, like an order of thoughts, then of course it's idealistic. But if we understand it in the dialectical materialist sense, that reality is replete with lawful determinations, that the patterns we observe within nature obey laws, then we arrive at a cosmological understanding of being, which Marxism does assert and affirm. So Russian cosmism before the Soviet era was very seamlessly part of the Russian civilization, much like the Chinese, notion of Tian, okay, so heaven and the heaven-human resonance. But under the Soviet era, cosmos was understood in the materialist way, seamlessly, by the way, through the lens of a kind of cosmic determinism. So what is the order within which the biological processes, geological, chemical, physical, how do these all interact and fit within one order? And how does that order have a resonance with what we would regard as principles that we reflect into thought? The principles being dialectical laws. So as long as we believe in that resonance between the deeper order of reality and the principles that we reflect into thought, we are affirming the notion of a cosmos, dare I say a sacred cosmos. Now, Marxism absolutely does this. Marxism is scientific, but a lot of people confuse science with positivism, and Marxism rejects positivism and empiricism. The science within Marxism is a cosmological outlook that believes in a resonance between the dialectical outlook and the actual laws of nature. So what does that mean within Marxism? Marxism basically affirms that the same patterns that we can observe that govern the development of history have a resonance in the development of nature. This is what, at the outset, non-negotiably puts Marxism in proximity with the cosmological outlooks of world history. Because, and this is an extension of my critique of Rockhill, Western Marxism becomes Western rather than Eastern when it separates Marxism from the cosmological dimension that was always there in the beginning and says this is just about sociology and this is just about history. This is not about nature, and this is not about the real, and this is not about, absolute being. This is just about history. Now, where does that separation actually come from? It comes from something that I mentioned earlier, which was the revisionism of Marxism because of the development of social democracy as an institution, which confined Marxism to a very specific sphere within the total division of labor within society, which is what happened, And because Marxism was institutionally confined to one sphere within the division of labor, it became separated from the natural sciences, from astronomy, from biology, from all these other things. And there was a kind of neo-Kantianism that developed via Bernstein, but it became just characteristic of the social democratic worldview, which basically says that Marxism is not this claim to knowledge of the fundamentals of being and cosmos. Really, socialism is just this way of holding ourselves accountable institutionally on an ethical level for the governance of society. So these are institutions that are supposed to correspond to our ethical commitments for shaping and creating a democratic society. And that was an inherently neo-Kantian position. I can explain that if need be. But it's also one that Georgy Lukács took for granted. That Marxism is this kind of institutional ethical framework for intervening within reality and not a claim of, knowledge in the real or of being, right? And the seminal moment of Western Marxism, which Gabriel Rockhill doesn't talk about, is not Marcuse, it's not Zizek or whatever. It's when Lukács rejects Engels' dialectics of nature. And Western Marxism becomes something compatible with the bourgeois hegemony because Marxism confines itself to one special department within the totality of the mental division of labor under the bourgeoisie. So Marxists say, we won't say anything about physics, leave it to the physicists. We won't say anything about biology, leave it to the biologists. We're just going to be these ethical fucking fairies who concern ourselves with creating democratic institutions to hold our actions accountable to common commitments or something, right? So that is the seminal thing that defines Western Marxism. Now, meanwhile, what's happening in the Soviet Union? Okay, well, the Lysenko affair happened. Absolutely. We're back. That's a huge we're back moment for Marxism because it's reaffirming the notion of cosmos within Marxism. There's a resonance within the sphere of biology that corresponds with everything else. And it's not like this totally, completely empty, separate division of labor separated from the totality of the mental division of labor. But I'm not going to get into the Lysenkoism thing. But there's a reason why I stress the Lysenko pill in the way that I do. I'm trying to argue that Marx's science is cosmological, that dialectical applause do apply to nature, and that we're not positivists and we're not empiricists. We do have the gravity and the weight of the ancient Babylonian priests. I'm not saying we affirm the same things they did, but we have the weight of combining science with political authority, which is the nightmare of liberalism. But for us, the source of political authority, the source of scientific truth, the source of all these things are the same resonance. And that is a cosmological worldview. They're all resonances of the same cosmic order. So Eastern and Western Marxism split. In one ways you can observe that split is that Eastern Marxists have more balls when it comes to making claims about the natural scientific world. Not in ways that, the Western critique was always, you're just imposing ideology on science. Well, no, it's more like they're making their investigation of the natural world concordant with their overall worldview. Not that one is reduced to the other, but that they're all integral and harmonious. There has to be a resonance and harmony. One cannot contradict the other, at the very least, because there's a resonance between them, right? So, cosmos doesn't need to be understood as astrology or giving all weight to the heavenly bodies and planets and stars. I guess astrology is a bad term because it's the logic of, star logic or whatever, right? But that's a misunderstanding where people categorized planets and stars as the same thing in the past. So it's just a wrong term, I guess, in general, right? But Marxism is a cosmological worldview. It situates man within a cosmos that he harmoniously exists within, and there's a resonance between all phenomena across all the different kind of dimensions of the mental division of labor that allows us to have scientific insight into phenomena, right? So all distinct divisions within the total mental division of labor of science all have a harmonious resonance, and that is a cosmological understanding Marxism has. Now, so understanding how is it that there is an order of matter. What we see the problem of the way the West interprets materialism is that it's dualism. So there's a material sphere and there's a ideal sphere. So in the material sphere, we're all savage animals, like Nick Fuentes says we should be, and we should kill and murder and do whatever we want. But then in the ideal sphere, we're angels, right? And all cosmos means is that there is a resonance, an interrelation, and integrity that unites what we categorize as the ideal with the material. The material rhymes with the things we attribute to ideas. Does that mean ideas are real? No, it means that ideas are reflections of the material world. But in what sense does Marxism affirm the reflection theory of consciousness? Well, all our highest ideas and products of thought genuinely are reflections of things that are actually materially real, right? So, morality, for example. Morality is not reducible to chemicals or something. That's not the Marxist view. Morality is precisely sacred in Marxism because it actually reflects something materially real, a deeper order and lawful pattern of existence that we give way to in our relations and mode of production, for example, right? So there is a confusion between materialism and kind of this technical utilitarian reductionism. Those are not the same thing. Likewise, materialism also isn't a dualism that just rejects the ideal dimension of the duality. No. What Marxist dialectical materialism does is it takes things monopolized by idealism and tries to actually ground these in the relationalities of material phenomena, which are very different things, right? And which is an inherently a cosmological orientation that Marxism has. So, what about the cosmic dimension, though? Like, in the sense colloquially understood, like planets and stars. I mean, can we meaningfully talk about those having any significance for history and historical phenomena? Because we know there's a resonance, but the resonance doesn't necessarily have to be that they directly coincide, that, you know, the auspicious conjunction really does correspond to a new era within history, or like for example, the way in which planetary bodies interact. Sure, does that ultimately have a resonance with historical phenomena? Indirectly, not even indirectly. There's no causal relationship necessarily, but the same kind of pattern of relationality is there, like the dialectical interactions between physical phenomena. There's a deeper kind of logical structure or relationality that you could say is there, right? Like, just in a strict kind of, if we abstract a logic, dialectical logic of phenomena. But that doesn't mean there's even any relation between them, right? But could we, from a materialist perspective, say that maybe the Babylonians and the Chinese and the Egyptians and all human societies before the modern era, maybe we're onto something? Could we actually argue that? Would there be grounds we could argue that? Well, first of all, let's be clear. They were right. You can't dispute that they were recording meaningful things by looking at the stars, because they believed they were meaningful. So, because they attributed meaning to it, it does actually correspond to patterns throughout history, just because of that. Even if it, like, physically didn't, you know? But physically, could we even make a deeper leap? And this is where I'm going to get controversial. And entertain the notion that astronomical bodies affect us in ways we don't fully understand, which might allow us to kind of, through a materialistic lens, reevaluate Babylonian astrology and Egyptian astrology and Persian, it's Chinese. Well, I'm not going to give you a definitive conclusion about what I think we're just working with hypotheses here. But I want to introduce you to two thinkers. One is Chizhevsky, is I'm saying his name right? Chizhevsky, Alexander Chizhevsky, and Vladimir Vernadsky. Chizhevsky and Vladimir Vernadsky, okay? So, the one who was accepted more fundamentally within Soviet scientific circles was Vladimir Vernadsky. Okay, Vernadsky basically developed a geocosmic notion of life. His basic idea was that what we understand as the biological is a geological phenomenon, right? He's working from the notion of noosphere that comes from the old Russian cosmos, and he's situating all life as we know it within a cosmos, which he focuses on the Earth, okay, geocosmos. Still cosmic, but it's confined to the Earth, geocosmic, right? And he kind of tries to study how, not just like as a conceptual paradigm for like what's life, right? He ultimately concludes that the purpose of life and then eventually consciousness is that it's to affect and reshape geological phenomena. That the distinguishing quality of consciousness lies in its ability to change Earth's geology. So it's like the Earth, in kind of like a Mother Gaia orientation, I guess, giving rise to consciousness as an attribute of the planet Earth, the geocosmos, to change itself. So this Vernadsky was very well received within Russian scientific circles, high-ranking Russian scientific circles. And the key thing with Vernadsky, I guess that would be controversial, is that one thing that might not be too controversial is this notion of, the kind of biochemical cycles within Earth's geology and how all these things kind of interact into one integral, harmonious totality. So he vehemently rejects the notion of randomness driving biological development. He situates this within a cosmic determination, right? Which is the planet. He situates thought as a geological phenomenon. And that's a cosmological view. That means that the products and the structure and the phenomena we can attribute to thought has a resonance within the material order of the Earth, the cosmos, right? A geocosmos, I should. So this is a cosmological view. The fact that you think there's a deeper order to matter, it's not just all randomness, that our thoughts do, the structure and order we have that we think is just thought does reflect a deeper order of matter itself and the universe itself. That was his view. So, so these kind of views were not, they were commonplace, and Soviet scientists had a cosmological understanding of science, okay? They didn't kind of try to neatly separate these things into separate divisions of labor. They were interested in articulating a cosmos of some kind. Now, the other thinker who would be more interesting on this point, who Stalin actually rejected because he flew too close to the sun, quite literally, is Alexander Chizhevsky, who recorded the correlation between sunspots, spikes in solar activity, and historical phenomena like revolutions. Now, why did Stalin not take kindly to this? Because he, it could be interpreted, and he kind of was leaning too much on this interpretation, that the October Revolution was just a consequence of a spike in the sun. Stalin didn't like that because it's kind of nihilistic. It takes away from the historical logic of the revolution. But if we are less aggressive about how we interpret Chizhevsky's outlook of heliobiology, is what he called it, how does cosmic radiation affect life on Earth and affect human psychology and our nervous systems, which are all interrelated things? Well, he proposed that during these sun spikes, there's an atmospheric ionization that occurs on Earth, and that the negative ions actually have an effect on our nervous system. And he actually conducted research and did this with animals and so on. I mean, he wasn't just talking out of his ass. And he concluded that the effect corresponds to a kind of psychological excitation. So he interpreted upheavals as the reaction of the nervous system to excitations by the negative ions caused by the atmospheric ionization induced by sunspot phenomena. And he kind of created this kind of cosmic determinism that helped for him explain historical events. Now, the reason I'm pointing out Alexander Chizhevsky is not necessarily because I agree with him, but think about that kind of framework of understanding how cosmic radiation might be affecting life and our nervous systems and our psychology and our moods or whatever in ways we just don't fully understand. And think about how that might, you might be able to think about, other planetary bodies. And so what does that mean? It means maybe there is a materialist framework that allows us to say that these more ancient kind of astrological or whatever worldviews, maybe they were onto something. I'm not actually going to assert a definitive conclusion on that. I'm just open-minded to it. I think the Earth does get a lot of cosmic radiation. We don't fully understand gravity, contrary to what they're trying to make you think. We don't fully understand electromagnetism and gravity and cosmic radiation, and we don't know what the origins of life are. And there are just these millennia-old kind of calendric patterns and rhymes and structures that all preceding civilizations seem to have kind of tapped into, and it was very meaningful for them and practical to them. So maybe, was it correct to dismiss all of that wholesale because it didn't conform to positivism? And I think the biggest tell for why they were dismissed is because, well, the way that gets reflected into folk astrology and cheap folk superstition and it gets vulgarized as a kind of street fortune telling and all, like I get that. I get how that's all bullshit and whatever. But I think that I personally, I'll just, at the risk of sounding absurd, I don't dismiss Babylonian astrology and Chinese astrology wholesale. I don't. I mean, I think they probably were onto something, I think that's pretty fair to say they probably were. I'm just telling you how you could understand that from a materialist point of view. That's not necessarily metaphysical at all, because we are part of a cosmos. There is constant cosmic radiation that's filtered by the Earth's atmosphere. But the Earth's atmosphere is not, it's a filter. It's not a shield, it's a filter, right? And how that interacts with life and how that interacts with the geological motion of the plates and the Earth as such, I think that's all an open question. But the assertion of Marxism at the bare minimum is there is a resonance and relationship between all these things. Even if we don't know what that relationship is, to deny the possibility entirely that there is, I think, radically excludes you from Marxism. I think the bare minimum assertion of Marxism or that justifies heaven-human resonance on the most bare bones abstract level you can think of, is that there is absolutely, yes, a relationship between the things we regard as meaningful within our thoughts and the cosmos. We're not asserting any specific relationship. We're certainly not endorsing and affirming every type of superstition, but there is a relationship. Now, and Marx says that very clearly when he critiques the young Hegelians and Hegelian philosophy and talks about how that's a reflection of the mode of production. Well, Marx's notion of a mode of production is a cosmos. It's a type of cosmos. It may not be specifically referring to stars and planets, but it is an order of matter that the rational order of thought only reflects. So that makes Marx's understanding cosmological. That is itself an affirmation of the notion of macrocosm and microcosm. You know, in this case, Hegel's philosophy is a microcosm and the capitalist mode of production is a macrocosm. But it's a cosmic worldview, and it absolutely affirms a lot of the things that sacred cosmology took for granted. In terms of like the fact that there's a relationship between these things. And ultimately, what that means for the Marxist understanding of morality, to conclude what I've been trying to say from the start, is that there is a relationship between the material order, the cosmos, and our moral sensibilities. That the very false problem of the bourgeois ideology is that it separates these things. Why is moralism impotent? I'll tell you why moralism is impotent. Because to simply reflect in your thought and enunciate what's right and wrong is very different from proving what's right and wrong at the level of the actual material determination of things. Right and wrong have to be measured according to a determination. So, for example, what is right is what fulfills a specific cosmological order, and what is wrong is what undermines that determination as a kind of entropy, I guess. That's how Zoroaster understood it. He literally thought evil deeds contribute and erode the cosmic order. But the materialist grain of truth in the Zoroastrian notion is that it's perfectly materialist. Look, I'll just vulgarize it, in a way stupid people can understand. What's right is communism, and what's wrong is reaction and counter-revolution. And that's not because of an ideological dogma or a preference for a specific system. If we believe communism is the riddle of history solved, and it is the orientation of, it is like the truth of history, the true cosmos of mankind, then we can also understand morality in those terms. Because what is right and what is wrong? Right and wrong should not be separated from truth and false. What is right is also what's true, and what is wrong is also what's false. And I think that's why the creator of the book Might is Right by Ragnar Redbeard, he was actually a socialist activist. Because you can interpret might is right as bourgeois nihilism, or you can interpret it as what is right is also what is simultaneously true, and what is false is also what is simultaneously wrong. And that's why might is right, or right is might. But how might is right is not immediate. That's what people get wrong. So if you go and you beat up a disabled person, you could say, well, might is right. Wait a second. You have not yet arrived at might, though. Because might is what is the ultimate outcome of history. Might is not Donald Trump kidnapping Maduro. Might is what comes knocking at the end of the whole thing, which you have to analyze and understand at the level of where is our system going? Is our system functional or is it dysfunctional? Well, if our system is dysfunctional and is going to break down under the weight of its own contradictions, then the mighty thing is not the current regime after all. It might appear like the mighty thing because, it's able to exert more force in the short term, but in the long term, it's not the mighty thing, right? So, when you think about it, you have to rethink morality. In a Marxism doesn't deny morality. We have an understanding of a moral cosmos. We have cosmos. Cosmos, morality is a reflection of cosmos. That's the Marxist view of morality. The key is cosmos, cosmos, cosmos. Where does an action fit within the wider cosmic order? What resonance does it have with that order? That's what morality is. So, I talked about this earlier when I watched this Chinese guy who said, why do bad guys win and good guys lose all the time? And he said, well, bad guys have a lot of clarity and good guys usually have self-doubt and are confused. So is a good guy moral if he's weak and he's confused and he doesn't have clarity? No. He's communicating, he's making a claim about being moral, but is he actually moral? No, because to actually be moral, there has to be a consonance. A concordance, I should say. There has to be a concordance with reality. If you're too weak to lift up your arm and, God forbid, beat down a pedophile to protect a child, are you truly a moral person just because you vocalize your opposition to the abuser and aggressor? No, you're not a moral person. You're a moral person if you fucking do something about it. And if you articulate how to do something about it, and if you articulate the principle of macrocosm, microcosm, we all know the U.S. regime is immoral and wrong. So should we run outside naked and say, you're immoral, you're wrong, so we're going to take you down? That's not our... Nick Fuentes is accusing us of having that position, and many leftists do have that position. But the position is actually to articulate how our affect of moral on our moral sensibility is a reflection of something material, real, according to the logic of the various material determinations and the cosmic order. So just because you are disgusted by the actions of the USA doesn't mean you have the prescriptive mandate to do something about it. You have to analyze what's wrong. Not just by condemning that it violates a principle of, rights, self-determination of nations or whatever. You have to actually also articulate, how is this also cosmologically false? As in, how is this not going to be able to save the U.S. from its fate? How does this fit within the system? This is the key moment, I think. And if you look, a lot of people don't like what I'm saying. But it's like, when you think about it, isn't this precisely the step you have to take from liberal idealism to Marxist materialism? Instead of complaining and whining about how immoral everything is, actually understand the system. Why is everything wrong? Well, don't just reduce the system, by the way, to a reproduction of violations of your moral sensibility. Understand by the logic of the system itself, why is it wrong? Why is it false? Why is it destined to change and break down? And why is communism inevitable and so on and so on? It's like, it's not that our moral sense, it's not that morality is garbage and that we shouldn't take our moral sensibilities clearly. We just shouldn't confuse our moral sensibilities for cosmic knowledge. Scientific knowledge and morality have a resonance, but they're not identical. And that's why moralism is impotent, because it confuses the two things. For example, look at people's reaction to China not doing anything about Gaza. It's like, the reason that's moralism is because we all know there's something wrong going on in Gaza. We all know something is wrong with the world. But it's not enough that is not enough to act. Just knowing it's wrong doesn't actually automatically give you knowledge and insight into how it works and what are the causes and what creates those causes. How do those causes function? How do they work? And what would be the right thing to do within a framework that articulates our place within that order. Which means the best thing China can do is continue undermining U.S. hegemony indirectly. Right? Through creating an economic alternative for nations that want to preserve their sovereignty and still want to develop their productive forces. Jesus Christ, I'm seeing so many retarded comments in the fucking live chat. It's like disgusting. I'm gonna ignore those. Anyway, so if you separate the moral from the material in the way that bourgeois ideology does, then you get the Nick Fuentes position where you're going to be moral at church in the ideal realm, and you're going to be a bastard in the material realm, because what you're doing is you're separating things that belong together. There is a harmonious resonance between the moral, right, the dimension of the moral, and the dimension of the actual and the real and the existent. The connection is not direct, but it is a relationship. There is a symmetry. And this is what Marxism affirms with respect to the moral. And the bourgeois view, in the realm of the sciences specifically, is metaphysical, okay? But the metaphysics is that it's based on the notion of the world of total depravity, which ultimately concludes in this stupid notion of the multiverse. But the bourgeois science is all founded upon separating the moral order of celestial heaven and cosmos from natural, scientific, and physical phenomena. Now, it's Marxism that reunites these things, but bourgeois ideology insists that they are not only separate, but opposed to each other. That's why in the bourgeois view, nature is depraved. Nature is cannibalism, Hobbes, the Hobbesian jungle or wilderness. People are inherently, like that one Christian guy tried to say, they're ultimately going to be motivated by their lustful desire to murder and to sexually assault or whatever. I don't know if I can use these terms on YouTube. And they must contradict, our morality must be pure and therefore separated from the material realm. And that's why for the bourgeoisie, you're more moral the more materially depraved you are, paradoxically. Think about that. The more your morality is embedded in a cosmic determination, the more it's impure. because it's inauthentic. It's not pure morality. It's contaminated and infected by dirty material things. That's really why Westerners think China is so immoral. China has this lofty understanding of heaven-human resonance. So for China, the pursuit of material, the way in which China tends to the material world and takes it seriously, Westerners say, oh, that means they must disregard the moral. In reality, the Chinese don't separate them in the way we do. The Chinese view the moral order to not dwell within this ephemeral, intangible realm of, ephemeral kind of abstract realm of our pure thoughts, but to be a reflection of Tian, or heaven, heaven's order, right? Cosmic order. So that's why Westerners, they call Chinese people bug people, and they say they're inherently immoral. In reality, the Chinese have integrated, like all civilizations in history, the moral and the material as a sacred cosmos. And only the West rejects this. Only the West is actively trying to create a pure kingdom of morality in the form of abstract institutions with regulated ethical commitments that are totally separated and excised from cosmic order and material order. And this is the inherent hypocrisy of the bourgeois world. A hypocrisy that's culminated in the Nick Fuentes, Donald Trump neocon shit we're seeing, which is, okay, we're going to go mask off and finally just be real. But what's paradoxical is that you're not being real. You are still embedded in a kind of ideology of bourgeois metaphysics, which suppresses the moral in favor of this depraved notion of matter and material reality. I could go on for hours talking about heaven-human resonance and Marx's materialism. Because the very fact that Engels wrote the dialectics of nature and the same dialectical logic that applies to the development of nature, the logic also applies to human history, that absolutely, without any doubt, makes Marxism a cosmological materialism and worldview, cosmo-materialism, which was given to them. They took it for granted. And that is why I affirm Lysenkoism, okay? Because the reason most people have a knee-jerk negative reaction to Lysenko is because they hate this idea that nature and biology itself could have some kind of resonance with the things, with the lawful patterns of the moral realm or the material, the societal realm. And I'm not talking about the nonsense of Lysenko's grafting plants and it's communism of plants sharing their resources. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how Lysenko kind of is discovering this dialectical Hegelian kind of logic of biological organisms as integral determinations, irreducible to their specific molecular components, and as an extension of Maturin's notion of metabolism, and how different species are these kind of different integral metabolic determinations that are qualitatively distinct. And it's a very kind of beautiful dialectical understanding of nature, which has, it's almost like the real analogy for Lysenko, I'll just give it to you. As Stalin says there's socialism in one country, Lysenko says that there's an inheritance in one, belongs to one, not one or two technically, but Lysenko says for Stalin, the nation is for Lysenko the metabolism and the species. Like that's the resonance as far as the logic. And it's a very beautiful, harmonious resonance when you think about it. That instead of the neo-Darwinist view that there's no qualitative distinctions of species, these are all just random different configurations of the same genetic material trying to reproduce itself. Stalin also rejects that in the Western kind of notion of history, which says nations are just these random configurations of the same base. And Stalin says no. In his intervention on linguistics, Stalin says language is not the superstructure, and it's also irreducible to relations of production, the base. Language is this integral determination that gives context to the base superstructure distinction in the first place. So you see a resonance of this in the logic of Lysenkoism. And that's why I reject, and you need to understand all science as a resonance, okay? Western and bourgeois science is not neutral investigation of natural phenomena. It has metaphysical assumptions which bear a direct resonance to the ideology of liberal democracy and pluralism and cosmopolitanism and the cultural free jazz and so on and so on. And this is, what do you call this? It's a kind of anti-cosmos. It's a kind of inversion of cosmos. It's what I would call scientific nihilism. That knowledge, all the knowledge you're getting in the investigation of nature is ultimately knowledge of nothingness. And that is the consensus in scientific institutions. What Einstein said, the more we know nothing. That, and by the way, Einstein, who was fucking destroyed by Niels Bohr thanks to Chinese scientists, proved him wrong. Anyway, I'm going to talk about physics in a second because that's going to be my real concluding remark here. I want to finally, and I'm not going to get into this yet, actually. I want to continue talking about what I was going to talk about. The bourgeois nihilism. That's right. Guys, look at my stamina. Just for 3.5 hours, I'm fucking doing this shit, right? When you excise the dimension of order and lawfulness, and ultimately the distinction we would call moral, from matter, as bourgeois science insists we do, clean it and wipe it clean of any kind of biases, right? Then effectively what you produce is nothingness, because determination itself becomes impossible. Without cosmos, things cannot have determination. If things are not part of a greater order, they have no existence. They are not a real determination. Because every determination is a specific resonance. That's how it is meaningful as a determination. But if it doesn't have that, then there's just nothingness. In the real, there are no determinations. And why is that? Well, for something to have qualitativeness, right? It has to reflect a relationality that ultimately is a specific kind of ontic resonance, which cannot be understood as a one-sided definition of matter. So, for example, in our attempt to measure particles, the most fundamental unit of being, an atom, right? Below an atom, actually, subatomic particles. What is that? We want to know what that is. Well, when we try to measure them, we have something called the collapse of the wave function. We're abstracting it from and its ontic resonance that gives it determination. And ultimately, when we observe a particle, we're observing a nothing. Or you could look at it in the reverse. When we're observing a wave, we're observing a nothing. You can look at it in both ways, right? But in order to get to determination, you have to accept that matter is always embedded in a relationality that has ontic resonance. That's part of a cosmos that reflects, that is cosmological because it rhymes with, if you want to put it this way, it's part of the melody of the universe. It rhymes with the way the cosmos is, right? When you try to abstract it from that and reduce it to not even just an empirical phenomena, but an object of measurement, right? You're taking away the very quality of determination, such that you're turning it into a nothing. It becomes nothingness. Call me Thriller, I'm ignoring that rage bait. Nice try, though. It's a good attempt, honestly. So, bourgeois science concludes that everything is nothing. Which concludes in what? Why are there different things? Because of multiverse, because of omniverse, which basically means, and this is actually how it by throwing away the notion of cosmos, what bourgeois science does, more or less, is affirm this notion that everything is not part of one cosmos. Everything, because here's what's sad. It's so sad, actually. It's so sad. When we actually investigate using bourgeois modern science, physics, the cosmic harmony of things becomes so fucking unavoidably clear. So to deny the cosmic resonance of matter, bourgeois science invents multiverse to say, actually, what you would think is a resonance that's part of one cosmic order, this is just a way that, material phenomena are slipping in and out from different universes. Okay? So this is how they interpret the interference pattern, right, with the double slit experiment or whatever. Whereas this proves that we're living in a cosmos, they say no, this is just proof that we're just living in different universal nothing universes of nothing. But they're different ones somehow. It's like running away from the truth of cosmos and creating this infinite fractal of nihilistic universes, okay? You can't call them universes. It's multiverse. Multiverse is how the bourgeoisie now copes with the contradiction between the empirical and scientific measurements, interventions we make in reality, and their underlying metaphysical commitments to nihilism. And ultimately, bourgeois science is also another manifestation of the nihilism is agnosticism, where you notice the philosophers of bourgeois science will not defend positivism. They're post-positivists, right? So the whole fraud of bourgeois science is that we should never draw conclusions. Theory, there's no such thing. Theory is not real. As a matter of fact, if I walk into a biology department and I make the argument that there's no gene, they'll agree with me. They'll agree with me because even the notion that there's a determination that we can say is a consistent determination, they say, well, technically no. And this is the scientific outlook of the bourgeoisie today, which is reality is nothing, and that any kind of meaningful claim about reality is impossible. And that all we can do is, point out, I don't know, local observations. We can kind of We can make local claims that are acceptable within the confines of a specific research paper in this specific department for this specific academy. But any kind of holistic theory of nature, forget about it. Every stable determination, impossible. This is the filth of free jazz as applied to science. And that's the prevailing view, the bourgeois view within science. And in this sense, Marxism is rejected by science, because Marxism is a cosmological science. It's a cosmological partisanship is inherent in Marxism, for sure. The bourgeoisie affirms a kind of free-floating, infinitely abstract, cosmopolitan subject who does not commit to anything. And this is a completely, radically opposed to the Marxist view. Now, finally, I want to say, why does Zizek agree? Why is Zizek an astrologer? What makes Zizek an astrologer? Zizek affirms Slavoj Zizek is an astrologer, and that's a good thing. What I love about Slavoj Zizek is he finally made a leap.
CJ Young added 10 to the war chest. No, but as you don't understand, how many holes do women's have below the belt?
CJ, thanks for the 10. That's a very strange question. Like, what is this? Guys, I've lost my sense of humor. You know, I've been rage baited so much by chat. I've lost my sense of humor. Okay. I want to continue, because I want to finish up on this point and then collect many donations from you guys who are going to donate a lot of money to me for doing this. Slavoj Zizek is an astrologer because he did the correct thing, which is connect ontology to physics. I applaud him for that. He will always deserve a place in the Hall of Fame for that. Because when you think about it, ontology, which is a question of being, should correspond to physics. Physics is, what is being? What is it actually? Well, that's physics, right? And because Zizek discovers a resonance between his philosophy of the less than nothing and the Sex and the Failed Absolute, Less Than Nothing is a good book, but Sex and the Failed Absolute is, I think, where he loses it. But in any case, the fact that he uses particle physics as the staging ground to articulate his ontology means that Zizek is returning thinking back to cosmos. And that is logic of macrocosm and microcosm. That he's creating this connection. He's affirming a resonance between particle physics and philosophy. Welcome back, Cosmos. Now, do I agree with Zizek's philosophy or his interpretation of particle physics? No, but I applaud that he's taking a leap and asserting there's a connection between them. Whatever the content of those so happens to be, there's still a connection. And we are getting back very, very infinitesimally close back to dialectical materialism. That's how we're going to recontextualize the context of Soviet dialectical materialism. We're going to have to connect ontology to physics. And that's just, when you do that, you're just back in the ballpark of dialectical materialism. So this is what makes Zizek an astrologer. Sure, for him, it's particle physics. Well, for the ancient Babylonians, it was stuff going on in the sky, in the stars. But the fact that you're articulating a resonance across supposedly disparate phenomena of nature and of, you know, the human mind, or of language and meaningful culture and society, the fact you believe there's a resonance between those two things, you're affirming a kind of astrological or cosmological outlook of macrocosm and microcosm. And the materialist verdict is clear. Okay, consciousness and the mind is a reflection of the material world. But a lot of Marxists haven't actually thought about what that means. They think that what it means is that everything we believe in is an illusion, and that the only thing that we should think about in our consciousness is robots. And, you know, they're so stupid. No, you idiot. When the Greeks were talking about Zeus and they had this pagan cosmos, they were, in a twisted and distorted way, reflecting real relationships that exist in the material world. Not in an obscured way for sure, but there's still a resonance. And correct scientific consciousness doesn't mean we deny art, and I even would go as far as say it doesn't even mean we deny religious truth. Even Marx said we don't deny religious truth. We just understand the material reality of that. And that reality doesn't produce a boring reductionism where we have a one-dimensional, flat realm of substance that, okay, the truth of the Quran is just rocks and chemicals. No! The richness of the meaningfulness of the Quran is reflected by the material world itself. That's the point. We don't say matter is just boring, static rocks and stupid, dumb substances. Matter itself is brilliant. What did Marx say? He said the proletariat is the ingenious soil of the people. QED. Fucking mic drop, bitch. Now let's get the fucking money pouring on. Let's unpause.
Based.
Thank you for expressing
X7,
our
what's up,
collective
bro?
anger against the glasses wearers.
It's a fucking honor.
Based.
Amila!
The truth is unconcealment.
Agreed. Where the hunt is at?
Based.
YouTube streams
Sebastian!
preferable to kick as long as no censorship. More accessible plus VOD saved indefinitely.
You know how fucked up it is for me to fucking have a lecture for 3 hours this fucking deep? With such passion and intensity, and then say where the hunt is at? That's why you guys have to fucking watch me. Who the fuck else are you gonna find who's like Hazaldin, a real motherfucker? I'm on some real shit, motherfucker. Nope, you will never find a glasses-wearing bitch philosopher who's on talking about the shit. I'm not a philosopher, but you get what I'm saying. None of these motherfuckers roll like how I roll, bitch. I'm saying mic drop on top of all that shit. I'm saying mic drop on top of all that shit I was talking. I'm still about some real ass shit. I'm so tired, holy fuck. I am starving, y'all. I'm starving, y'all. Wishes he was LaRouche. Why the fuck would I wish I was LaRouche? I wish I was LaRouche? What the fuck are you talking about? Oh my god, Australia Stanny! What are you doing, bro? Huh? Australia Stanny with the 10 on Kick? On Kick, bro? Yo! Thank you, bro. But I don't know what the hell this shit is coming from. Subscription. How do I turn this damn shit off? Turn that shit off. Turn off a subscription. Stress Stanny, bro, thank you. Oh man, guys, I am like knocked out. American Bolshevik! What up, bro?
Based.
I have never crashed out as hard as I did on this stream. Just goes to show where he goes, insecure Lebanese guy. Yeah, bro. Yeah, I'm fucking that's what I get upset about. Yeah, what I get upset about is when you call me when you make fun of how I look and stuff. It's totally not when you fucking insult my intelligence saying some retarded ass shit about Foucault or something. You know what the best thing about rage baiting me is? To successfully rage bait me, you have to be literate. I am starving. Aaron, what's up, bro?
Based.
Good lecture.
Thank you, bro. I'm glad you appreciate it. One's if you guys learned some shit or this expanded your horizons in any kind of way. If you know what cosmos means, if any of this was useful to you or insightful to you. It's just so exhaustingly true. Like, now you know what the mandate of heaven actually fucking means. It means you've successfully proven in the saga the logic of your revolutionary dynastic struggle to take power. You have reproduced the very resonance that is the governing principle of the entire cosmic order. That's what the mandate of heaven means. There's a specific dialectical logic in how dynasties rise and fall. And a rising dynasty, what it does is, it's not simply somebody that just takes power. It's somebody who kind of establishes a principle, unites with peasants. Sunrise, what's up? It's a specific interaction of the dictatorship of nomads and peasants that happens. And this is observed, this revolutionary event, it's observed to have cosmological resonance. All resonance, do you know what resonance means, guys? Resonance, what it means, I gotta do something about this book. I mean, what resonance means is it's not synchronicity. I would use that word if that's what I meant. I'm not saying everything is synced, necessarily. I'm saying everything rhymes. That's what resonance means. There's a kind of underlying logic that rhymes. Fuck. Am I a fucking cult leader for saying this shit? I am so hungry. I would define resonance as the principle governing the development of cosmos, and dissonance also partakes in this development, but as a retarding element. Dissonance is what makes things also determinate because it kind of traps them in cycles. So dissonance and resonance are actually both important. But it's only out of the resonance that you get novelty. Dissonance is what creates differentiation and consolidation that ultimately makes specific things determinate. I say shit and people are like, what the fuck are you saying? It's like, Jesus Christ. I don't give a shit about that stupid Hertz sound shit, all right? It's like, you know what, the LaRouche, he did not have a notion of cosmos. And he was a Platonist. I'm talking about the opposite of Platonism when you think about it. I'm not saying that the cosmos obeys a moral ideal, okay? I'm saying the opposite. I'm saying what our notion of ideality is a reflection of cosmic order, right? A wrong one, by the way. Um, I need to ask a favor from you guys. In addition to liking and commenting, absolutely like the fucking stream. Fuck is wrong with y'all? Like the stream. But in addition to that, I need y'all to give me timestamps, please. give me timestamps so I can put it in the description, and the stream can be like divided across the 4 segments. So there's going to be an introduction, and then there's going to be the 3 segments that I did. And I'd like you guys to give me the timestamps for those. Jennifer, what's up?
Go eat.
Jennifer, thank you so much. Appreciate you. Thank you. Yeah, so if you guys could do that, it'd be super cool. That'd be super cool. Hope you guys like the stream. And then you can divide out The part where we are on the cool down phase, relaxing. I'm so exhausted, guys. Jesus Christ. All right, guys. Hope you liked the stream. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. I can't play a song because I'll be fucking copyrighted. Bye, guys.